Chapter 1690. Woken introduced the situation of the new Undercity to the two female elven leaders. First, we need to go through a magic elevator that is 150 feet deep to reach the main passage in the periphery. Note that this elevator is also a killing trap. There were special winches at the top and bottom of the elevator. If one did not enter from the inside of the elevator, once the trap on the elevator was activated, everyone would be hanged to death. That's why we can't use a simple lift to reach the main passage. Then, there's a horizontal passage here, but their vents feel a little strange. Now that their royal pharmacist has betrayed them, it's impossible. I'm afraid they'll spread plague gas through the ventilation holes. After passing through the main passage, there is a downward slope. Previously, we took a diagonal elevator down, but I saw that there was more than one set of rolling stones on the top of the elevator. If there are enemies, this slope is not safe. Oh, I heard that in order to prevent the dwarves from digging in, they drew an underground hot spring river that doesn't freeze. If they dig in carelessly, the tunnel will fill with water in minutes. Then, Wajin talked for 10 minutes in one go and marked the routes he knew as much as possible on the 3D map. Servanas and Chandris felt their scalps go numb after hearing this. If they used elite soldiers to force their way through, it was unknown how many people would have to die before they could settle it. No wonder the damned master pharmacist and the dreadlord refused to leave without any reinforcements. It was because this mouse hole was the most powerful and safest place. Queen Sylvie made a pressing gesture with her hands and said, "Well, let's not discuss these details first." No discussion? Sal and Wajin were stunned. After all, the vanguard this time was a Frost Wolf Beastman. The Alliance doesn't care about the lives of the Frost Wolf Beastmen? It was Chandris who explained, No, entering the city is the last step. Let's open up a path with bombs first." Bombing? Could it be that the Alliance's cannonballs could already threaten 300 feet underground? This thought made the two tribal leaders shudder. Queen Sylvanas raised her hand, and an elf mage of the royal family immediately opened a magic mirror. The mirror showed a huge spherical bomb. The Red Dragon Queen, Alexstrasza, is very angry at those who spread the plague. This was a blasphemy against life and nature. Such a person must be punished with destruction. Therefore, she asked the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu to make this magic bomb called Fatty. When this thing explodes, it can produce an effect equivalent to 60% of Nozdormu's combat power. Sal and Wajin didn't know how terrifying Nozdormu's 60% power was. However, a mysterious Dragon King who had mastered the power of time always made people feel that it was amazing even though they did not understand it. Of course, Nozdormu isn't willing to kill or destroy anything in this world. Because it would go against his duty, I asked Duque to help me prepare the second bomb, Little Boy. At this point, when she used the magic mirror to show the second big bomb, Queen Sylvanas' beautiful lips curled into a resentful smile. It was a smile of extreme anger. Little boy. Sal could not understand the bad taste of a transmigrator who regarded explosions as art. Queen Sylvie shrugged. Duke and Magni created this horrible thing. Nobody knows how powerful it is except for them. The second bomb in the picture had a completely different feeling from the first one. The first, Fatty, gave Sal the feeling of mystery, that kind of unknown uncertainty, like a whisper, always teasing his heart, making him eager to see what would happen when Fatty exploded. The second, Little Boy, had a violent and restless aura. Even through the screen, Thrall, who had already begun to study the path of shamans, could clearly feel that the amount of fire elemental energy that Duke had compressed in this thing was definitely astronomical. Servanas asked seriously, "Let me confirm one last time. In order to punish the tribe's traitor Putre and the Forgotten Ones who betrayed the tribe, it wouldn't matter if the Alliance launched a powerful attack and blew up New Gloom City, right? Even if Winterspring becomes a dangerous place, is that right?" Sal and Wajin looked at each other and then nodded at the same time. Yes. Sal had to make such a decision. The warriors of the Frostwolf clan were his last hope. If even the Frostwolf was destroyed, he would not be able to control the situation. And Winterspring actually had nothing to do with the tribe. The Forsaken Ones had never truly ruled over this place or occupied some of the mines. It was extremely cold here, and there were many magic beasts. Even the Frostwolf beastmen did not want to live here. Moreover, this place was completely isolated by the Alliance. It was a complete enclave. In the past, the Forsaken could still be used as a nail to make things difficult for the Alliance. Now that even the Forsaken had rebelled, there was no point in restraining the enclave. Sal couldn't move his entire Frostwolf clan here, and then every time there was a tribal exchange or something, he had to look at the Alliance's face before he could cross the border, right? When Sal agreed to the Alliance's decision, the fate of the new Undercity was sealed. There was no organized air force in the new Undercity. There was no need to fight at all, and the Alliance gained air supremacy. Under the cover of a group of flying battleships, a big-bellied spaceship flew unsteadily over the Frost Whisper Canyon. Then, it opened its huge metal belly, revealing the bomb that was the size of a small house. Fatty! Fire! Following Queen Seed's order, the huge magic bomb began a free fall at an altitude of 1 kilometer. At this moment, when the bomb fell to the ground, it felt like the inner liner of a thermos bottle had exploded. It was as if a layer of liquid or gas had spread across the ice layer at the bottom of the Frost Whisper Canyon the moment the bomb exploded. It seemed useless, but after a few seconds, whether it was Sal, Queen Seed, or all the Alliance soldiers who were watching this scene had a shocked look on their faces. In the entire Frost Whisper Canyon, every iceberg, every steep wall, every rock covered in ice and snow on the ground silently melted. It was like a huge bunker made of sand was directly blown away by the wind. Under the guidance of Queen Seed, the cold wind blew from west to east, directly blowing away the rock and ice wall that had turned into powder. This scene was like an invisible giant spoon, easily digging out the Frost Whisper Canyon again and again. Only then did everyone remember that the Space Dragon King Nozdormu had never shown his true form in front of outsiders. He only summoned quicksand from around him to build his body. Chapter 1691. It was just that no one had thought that Nozdormu's ability to turn everything into sand and then transform it into his own body would be terrifying when used in ordinary battles. No matter how strong a castle was, it could not withstand the erosion of time. No matter how thick the rock layer was, it could not withstand the tide of sand transformation. So what if it was 300 feet? Right now, just by looking at it, at least 250 feet of frozen earth and rock layers had been directly turned into sand, blown away by the fierce winds that lingered in Winterspring Valley. Looking at Nozdormu's rarely exposed power, looking at the bow of the Windrunner, looking at the Elf Queen's golden hair dancing wildly as she summoned the wind, Sal and Wajin were so shocked that they could not say a word. As if he had already expected the power of Nozdormu's move, when the entire Frost Whisper Canyon was almost dug out, the second transport ship with a big belly flew shakily to the top of the new Undercity. It was completely in front of Sal. Servanas laughed loudly in front of a group of blood elves. His laughter was full of wanton and hatred. Ha! Ha! Anastrian, you betrayed your people for your ridiculous immortality. Do you really think that no one can deal with your shamelessness? Do you really think that the Blood Elves can't take revenge on you just because you found a new backer? Let me tell you, this is wishful thinking. It's not that the time hasn't come yet. The time has come, all of them will be avenged. Ha! The Blood Elves laughed along. The elves were arrogant. For thousands of years, they had always boasted that they were a great race that stood at the peak of civilization. However, this great race suffered the most serious setbacks in the second and third battles of the Dark Portal. The Long Song Forest was destroyed twice, and even Silver Moon City was bombed. Their king even threw himself into the arms of the undead king for immortality. The humiliation of having their glory trampled on and the humiliation of being betrayed had always weighed heavily on the hearts of the elves. Times had changed, and the elves had to follow the trend and throw themselves into the arms of the Alliance under the leadership of Servanas. However, with their long lives, they had never forgotten this embarrassment. Many times, even the support from the Alliance was seen as charity. However, this emotion was well guided by Servanas' subordinate, Rothelma Theron. The anger in the hearts of the people needed a target to vent, and the Sun King, who had betrayed the people in pursuit of immortality, was the best target. If he had forcibly changed his mind after being killed, it might have been forgivable. However, he was pressured and persuaded to voluntarily transform into a lich as a living being. This sin could never be washed away. In fact, after the Forsaken joined the Horde, the Alliance forbade the Blood Elves from deliberately causing trouble for the Forsaken. The Blood Elves hated the higher-ups of the Alliance because of this. Now that they had finally gotten their revenge, the Blood Elves immediately let out wild cheers. At this moment, this scene was being broadcasted to the entire Dorii kingdom by Queen Sylvie using magic. With the prior announcement, the people all knew that today, their queen would lead an army to wipe out those traitors. Alright, well done. Blow up those traitors. In the entire Dorii kingdom, the people were excited. They held Savannah's portrait high, and at the same time, they burned dummies with Anastrian's name in various large squares. In the Dalajan city, Prince Kale, that's looked at the images from all over the Dorii kingdom. At this moment, all the high elves in the Dalajan were anxious. In front of his supporters and the neutral elves, he also burned a dummy of his father, and then announced a decision that he had been preparing for a long time. I, Kale, that Sunstrider, officially announced today that I will abandon the surname Sunstrider. I will give myself a new surname, Eversong. To be honest, Kale, that's Eversong did not sound domineering at all. However, this represented Kale, that's political attitude. It symbolized that he had completely severed his identity as a prince, and he would never inherit the political legacy of his father. The surname Eversong, which represented the Eversong forest, was more neutral. It not only expressed his attachment and love for his hometown, but also showed that he was closer to the Ranger faction. He could be the president of the Dalajan, but in the end, when his destiny was over, Kale, that still thought that he could return to his roots. His political signal was responded to by the queen. And that came. She opened a portal and nodded at Kale. He nodded at Kale, stayed for a few minutes, and then left without saying anything. Everyone knew that this meant that the ruling Ranger faction had accepted Kale, and his followers. Above the Frost Whisper Canyon, the big bomb with the words, "For the traitor," written in Elvish text slowly fell and began to free fall under the gaze of tens of thousands of elves in the magic mirror of the live broadcast. A moment later, a terrifying light that seemed to be able to burn the retinas of mortals lit up below. It was a dazzling light that was like the rising sun. With a loud rumble, a small mushroom cloud rose in the canyon. A huge shockwave directly swept up an even higher and more terrifying cloud of dust and stones, rushing in all directions. At that moment, the sky and the earth lost color. In the political fleet in the sky, no one made a sound. Everyone was deeply shocked by this exaggerated scene. In the Naxxrama's command post, Duque curled his lips. It's not a day of nuclear annihilation yet. The data in the system prompt made Duque a little unhappy. In the eyes of others, this was already very terrifying. But the system data said it's equivalent to 2,000 tons of TNT. Duque scratched his head. Sure enough, if it's not nuclear energy, it won't be that powerful. A few years ago, Duque used the system to clean up the little stuff in his head, and after a long time of pointing and pointing, the Alliance completed the research of TNT and the emergence of modern artillery. However, the more advanced theory of the atomic bomb was not something that a college student like Duque could come into contact with. Knowing the most superficial principles didn't mean having the knowledge and industrial foundation to research. The technology tree had already climbed to an exaggerated level, and if the steps were forcibly pulled any further, it would pull the balls. Compressed fire elements with demigod-level magic power and loaded with 10 tons of TNT, this was already the limit of what conventional weapons could achieve. However, it's good that there's no nuclear radiation. At least we can dismantle those bones in the new Undercity. In the video, the last layer of rock blocking the top of the new Undercity had been destroyed. In the gradually settling smoke and dust, everyone could see the upper buildings of the new Undercity. Queen Sylvanas jumped down first. She turned into a terrifying tornado and blew away all the small gravel blocking the gap. There was no need for her to give any instructions. The other commanders on the battlefield easily found a way to break through. Kill, destroy those traitors. For the blood debt of sin Dorii. Chapter 1692. It had to be said that a Nastrian had really put in a lot of effort for this new nest. In the absence of human resources, it could be said that he had made full use of the mechanics. It was just that his poor imagination had limited the construction of the new undercity. He had never imagined that the 100-meter rock stratum that he relied on as an absolute barrier would be broken in such a way. No matter how many traps he had set up outside the new undercity, what was the use of them? They would not pass through your traps at all, and would directly enter the deepest part of your nest. Unless you had a bunch of big bombs hidden in your house and were prepared to die together with your enemies, the Forsaken who had participated in this betrayal would definitely kneel down. Seeing the Beastmen and Blood Elf army descending from the city dome that was supposed to be a rock stratum, the Forsaken were all frightened. "Don't kill me! I've been kidnapped!" a Forsaken shouted. Unfortunately, what greeted him were the golden warhammers of the Blood Elf paladins, the holy golden arrows of the Blood Elf rangers, and even the giant axes of the Beastmen warriors. Hijacked? Innocent? Perhaps it was. But everyone knew that those who had nothing to do with the great potion master Putray had long been killed by his new plague in the battle of the Calamity City, and had returned to the Lich King's command. The rest were either his hardcore accomplices, or at least neutrals, who knew what had happened but did not report it. It was not that Sar had not thought of screening these guys. After all, the tribe still needed the Forsaken mages. But Wajin reminded him that the anger of the Beastmen being betrayed could only be extinguished by destruction and death. In any case, the Blackrock tribe had been betrayed again. This was an ironclad fact. The last time was the incident of the Black Hand brothers 20 years ago. For glory, for the discipline of the army, and for the stability of the tribe Varrock Salyafar, who had already set off for Northrend, would definitely suppress the remaining Blackrock Beastmen and other Beastmen from other clans who had been deceived in the Calamity City that day. But every pair of eyes was watching the great chief's every move. The Beastmen could allow those who disagreed to leave, but they absolutely could not tolerate this kind of betrayal on the battlefield. Therefore, the elite assault troops led by the Frostwolf clan were even more ruthless than the Blood Elves. Besides, you claimed that you were innocent, yet you had the right to move freely in the new Undercity when you announced that you were leaving the tribe. Who were you trying to fool? None of the Forgotten Ones still in the new Undercity were innocent. When the huge battle axe descended, the Undyings whose muscles had long since lost their tenacity were torn apart. His head was chopped into a rotten watermelon, his arms and legs were cut off like broken firewood, and his body was like a rotten rag bag, with the blackened and withered organs falling out. Blood-curdling screams and wails of despair could be heard everywhere. It was the same for the Beastmen and the Blood Elves. There were no surrenders, and all the corpses of the Forgotten Ones were completely destroyed. The Blood Elf priests and holy knights who followed up immediately sprinkled holy light and holy water, purifying all souls that could turn into vengeful spirits. Haha. Servanas brandished the divine artifact longbow, Solidar Stars of Fury, and happily slaughtered the Forsaken. That's right, he wasn't shooting arrows. Instead, he was using the curved structure of the longbow to slash the fleeing Forsaken with a martial technique that resembled a machete. They were directly breached from the inside. Coupled with the huge explosion of the Great Bomb, many of the tunnels collapsed. The Forsaken ran around like blind flies before they were killed by the allied forces that caught up to them. "No. Great Chief, don't kill me, I can serve you." The captured royal pharmacist Putray screamed in fear. "Serve you? Go to hell and be a slave to your traitorous compatriots for millions of years." In front of the accompanying troll mages and under the live broadcast of the magic mirror, Sal grabbed Putray's collar and ruthlessly threw him to the ground. The heavy and enormous combat boots stomped on Presley's waist, and with a crisp crack, that guy's entire lumbar vertebra and pelvic bones exploded. "This is the fate of traitors." Sal roared domineeringly, raising the hammer of destruction in his hand. Through the magic mirror, the Beastmen who were still resting in Northrend could clearly see their great chief's black hammer ruthlessly smashing down, smashing the head of that damned traitor into a rotten watermelon. A rotten watermelon that had expired. Every beastman raised their arms or weapons at this moment, letting out deafening roars. Well done. Kill the traitor. This is the price of betrayal. On the other side, Servanas found the dreadlord Verimithus. Almost as soon as she saw him, Queen Sylvanas felt as if she was in a predestined battle. She did not know that this sinister-looking demon in front of her would become her subordinate in the original space and time. She also did not know that in the gates of heaven's wrath, he had also betrayed her. At this point in time, Queen Sylvanas only knew that this disgusting guy in front of her was one of the main culprits who had participated in the destruction of Longsong Forest and Silver Moon City. No, I can. The Dreadlord had no moral integrity. Perhaps other demons hated death, but they were not too afraid of it. Verimithus was different. Back then, he had entered Azeroth as a supervisor of the Scourge army. Later, after Archimonde died, he and the other Dreadlords first sought refuge with Arthas, and then were instigated by an Astrian. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was a slave of 3 different surnames. It would be better if he did not die, but once he died, his soul would be forced back into the twisting nether. Although the 3 leaders of the Burning Legion were now kneeling, who could guarantee that they would not come back to deal with him when they resurrected in the future? Thus, he knelt before Queen Sylvanas on the spot. Unfortunately, if Sylvanas was the Forsaken Queen who had just taken over the Forsaken in the original history and was extremely lacking in power and helpers, she might have tolerated him. Now that she was the demigod of Azeroth, the true queen of the elves, and the partner of the Alliance Commander Duque, did she need a slave of 3 different surnames to be her subordinate? Stop joking. Sylvanas did not even care about him. All she wanted was destruction and revenge. Good for the Scourge army. Good for the Forsaken. Good for the demons. Destroy them all. Wind elements completely exploded from Queen Sylvanas' body. A violent aura, overflowing with divinity, almost filled every corner of this dark palace. When he saw the lightning bursting from Queen Sylvanas' divine longbow, the Dreadlord no longer had any hopes of getting lucky. He pounced over, and with a wave of his hand, a large ball of stinky, rotten bee swarm was thrown over. Unfortunately, the dazzling lightning arrived with a loud rumble, turning everything in the large room into nothingness. The violent thunderbolts destroyed everything. Chapter 1693. The mighty Dreadlord had been blasted into smithereens by Queen Sylvie's furious attack. No, there were 2 pieces of hooves left, but Riataline, the leader of the Blood Elf Paladins, opened a portal to catch up with the second half of the battle. She directly went up with a big hammer and threw something like God's Wrath, smashing Verimithus into nothing. Demons were not afraid of dying from ordinary elemental attacks, but as a spiritual energy type of holy attacks, the demons were very hurt. Perhaps there would be a day when Verimithus would make a comeback, but mortals would not be able to see it anyway. There might be remnants of the Forsaken in those secret passages, and there might be powerful undead such as the Abomination hiding in dark corners. But it was the tribe's business to clean up the remnants. If the Alliance stayed here for too long, it would be a bit of a slap in the face. That night, after the battle, Queen Sylvanas withdrew with her people. The Elven army was also the main force against the Scourge. After pulling out this nail that was likely to cause a disaster, the Alliance could finally concentrate all its forces against the Scourge. While Queen Sylvanas and Sal were annihilating the traitors, many battles broke out in the Ice Crown Glacier. There was no winning or losing, it was simply a matter of exhausting the opponent's war potential. In order to overturn the Scourge, Duque asked Willan to come forward and transfer 2 Nar. One was in charge of Naxxramas, and the other was in charge of the Dalajan. Using the 2 floating cities as bases, they produced a large amount of holy water. Cannonballs were covered with holy water, weapons were covered with holy water, and even in all the upwind directions of the Ice Crown Glacier, Duque had people pour a large amount of low-purity holy water. The Scourge looked like they wanted to poison all the creatures in the world with a plague. The Alliance army looked like they wanted to purify all of Northrend with holy light. During this period, around the evil castle, Marikaris, there were many battles between the Alliance army and the Scourge. The biting cold wind blew the ice dust on the frozen plateau, and the cold fog rolled up like 1,000 layers of waves, layer upon layer, surging into the distance. In the wind that whistled like ghosts all year round, a large number of humanoid objects were slowly moving forward against this icy wind. Even in spring, the temperature in the Ice Crown Glacier would not be higher than 0 degrees. The cold wind rolled up the ice dust and blew the armor of this group of humanoid objects, and the cold wind invaded their bodies, but they still did not feel it, because they had all died a long time ago. Woo woo woo! A shrill alarm sounded from the east side of the mountain wall. The mountain wall that seemed to be a part of the dead world suddenly came to life. Countless people came out of the caves and tunnels and quickly entered the designated positions. These bones are coming every hour. They're really not tired of it. A soldier teased. Shut up. If we didn't have enough troops to rotate, we would have become like them. An alliance officer scolded his subordinate. This was a plateau close to the Gate of Death, Mordressa, in the east of the Ice Crown Glacier. At this moment, the Scourge soldiers were gradually approaching the alliance's position on the eastern mountain wall. They were the first to enter the range of the cannons. Katyusha, fire 3 consecutive shots. The highest commander of the camp, Lilith Windrunner, ordered calmly. Orders from General Windrunner. Katyusha, fire 3 bursts. The colonels and lieutenants in charge of each sector gave their orders. Although the large-caliber cannons were very powerful and could kill all the Undying within a radius of tens of meters, it was not worth it for the Scourge Army's zombies tactic. Heavy cannons of more than 150 millimeters were more suitable for bombing high-value targets such as fortresses, not these skeletons and zombies that Arthas saw as purely expendable. The first to fire was, of course, the Katyusha rocket launcher. Thousands of rockets flew across the sky, creating an artificial meteor shower. Boom! Flesh and blood flew everywhere, limbs exploded, and ice shards splashed everywhere. If it was an ordinary mortal army's infantry facing such a terrifying attack, they would have collapsed or at least stopped advancing. However, the Scourge soldiers, who had no sense of pain and no consciousness, continued to limp forward. Even if their lower bodies were blown off, they still used their remaining arms to maintain their posture of crawling. In other places, perhaps Katyusha would have been enough to solve all the problems. This was the extremely cold Ice Crown Glacier. Even though the surrounding mana veins had been invaded by Duque, violent cold winds still blew all year round. The Katyusha rockets landed on the ground. Other than the initial damage caused by the explosion, the fire that should have caused a second round of damage was extinguished by the cold wind. Even if there were any remnants of the fire, it would be extinguished by shadow wizards and low-level liches with their blizzard. On the Alliance's side, the Katyusha that had fired all the rockets quickly retreated, allowing the Katyusha that was fully loaded with rockets to replace it. Within the scope of the binoculars, the sea of undead, which was originally densely packed like a tidal wave, had become a little sparse. Fire the small-caliber cannons quickly. Target the enemy's large undead creatures. Immediately, more trapdoors on the mountain wall opened, and long cannons extended out, revealing dark muzzles. The cannoneers hiding behind the cannons were looking through the cannons. This was the mainstream support cannon of the Alliance, the 88mm anti-aircraft cannon. These cannons could be used to attack ice dragons and abominations. It was versatile. They aimed at the gigantic undead monsters on the plateau and pulled the trigger of the cannons. Bang, bang. Hundreds of holes on the mountain wall emitted black smoke from the cannons. Not only that, the 40mm Bofors anti-air cannons that were specially installed at the front line also started to fire at the larger undead creatures. Everyone knew that the Calamity Army had ice dragons that were only left with bones. In actual combat, there were also many skeleton draconians and skeletal draconians. They were not as powerful as abominations, but if they charged into the infantry formation, they could still cause a lot of damage. It was a waste to use the 88mm cannons to blast these things. The Bofors were just right. The thick and continuous cannons easily tore these big bones into pieces. Closer. It was getting closer. When they entered the range of the mortars, the entire Alliance's position was filled with the sound of cannons. If the soldiers did not put on earplugs in advance, they would probably all be deaf. At this time, they could only communicate with hand signals and lights. The Katyusha 88mm cannons, bofors, and mortars worked together from far to near, from top to bottom, forming an extremely powerful firepower net. In an instant, the losses of the Calamity army on the plateau increased rapidly. On average, for every Calamity soldier that charged to the front of the Alliance's infantry position at the foot of the mountain, at least 5 Calamity soldiers would be destroyed halfway. The next thing the undead army faced was the steel colossus at the front of the line of defense. These mechanical giants from Odermimmelin's workshop brandished their huge arms, and every time they swept across, they would scatter multiple undyings. Chapter 1694. There was not a single Alliance soldier in the first 3 trenches of the infantry position. The ones stationed there were the mechanical dwarfs and mechanical gnomes under Mimran's command. They were either using electric shocks or operating the new flamethrowers provided by the Alliance to destroy the Scourge soldiers with extreme efficiency. In Duque's estimation before coming to the Ice Crown Glacier, this was already an almost invincible formation. Unfortunately, there were too many Scourge soldiers. The seemingly impregnable front line of defense would always be broken through within a few minutes. This was because the bottom of the plateau of the Ice Crown Glacier was almost completely hollowed out by the spider demons belonging to the Scourge army. Those rushing over from the plateau were just bait. Soon, the real attack began. Near the first line of defense, hundreds of huge pits that could fit a tank suddenly appeared. Middle-level Scourge soldiers rushed out like marching ants. At the same time, dark clouds quickly flew over from the opposite side. They looked like dense locusts, but in fact, they were gargoyles that were even more exaggerated than a swarm of locusts. Any attack would not be less than 10,000. Tens of thousands? Hundreds of thousands? The Alliance soldiers seemed to have an illusion that the Scourge army had pulled out all the corpses and skeletons that had died in Azeroth over the past tens of thousands of years to become soldiers. It was no wonder. After all, in their eyes, it was as if all they could see were skeleton soldiers with tattered armor and no flesh. The zombie tide seemed to connect the sky and the earth. No matter how many times they faced such a sea of zombies, they still felt their scalps go numb every time they saw it. Boom! The heavy artillery at the rear of the Alliance's position began to roar. As the model of the Alliance's shotgun, once the Type 3 shell hit, a small area of the air would suddenly be cleared. Bang! 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 When the most threatening group of gargoyles attacked, all the 40mm bofors had no choice but to turn to the sky and fire. On the plateau to the east, the octuple bang cannons and dongfeng anti-aircraft cannons that had long been prepared were the same. Countless gargoyles were hit by the cannons and were instantly torn into pieces, falling from the sky. However, this was meaningless. As long as the Lich King's magic power was not exhausted, there were as many gargoyles as he wanted. At first, the Alliance would still send griffins and hippogriffons to intercept them. There were too many casualties. The cruel exchange made every Alliance general's heart turn cold. The most disgusting thing was that if the griffins that died in the Ice Crown Glacier were not treated with holy water in time, they would immediately turn into bone griffins and turn around to slaughter the Allied troops. The dragons of the Dragon Slumber Shrine could suppress the gargoyles, whose claws could hardly penetrate the scales and skin of the adult dragons. Dragons had the advantage of crushing their ranks. Unfortunately, there were too many gargoyles, and the giant dragons couldn't kill them all. Therefore, the Alliance's regular air force only lasted for 3 days before retreating. Replacing them were the Karaj bug people that Duque had specially found on Karaj. Although the twin emperors had temporarily knelt down, Duque's dominance over the Karaji insect people had not fundamentally changed. Duque rarely used these insects, especially when Bao Bing played with the Sea of Insects. The biggest reason was that the Sea of Zergs didn't explode on a whim. The insect queen was ready-made. The price for the insect queen to ovulate and give birth to small insects was a large amount of meat. This meant that once Bao Bing went berserk, the entire area would be barren, all the animals would be killed, and all the corpses would be devoured. In the Eastern Kingdom mainland or Kalingdor, Duque didn't dare to play with the Sea of Insects. That was tantamount to suicide. In Northrend, Duque didn't have so many scruples. When surrounding the Scourge army in the Ice Crown Glacier, Duque directly let the two Courage insect queens build nests in the Howling Fjord and the Grizzly Hills. After strictly forbidding the insects from attacking people with the Alliance and Horde emblems, the insect people ate happily. At the cost of the remaining Vrykul people in the area and the extinction of all the wild animals in the Grizzly Hills, Duque finally got a flying insect army of a total of 1 million. In the sky, the gargoyles that passed through the dense curtain wall of anti-aircraft artillery and the interception of the giant dragon army began to dive towards the Alliance's position. However, they were intercepted by the Courage flying insects that were as dense as a swarm of locusts. Often, the two air forces in the sky intersected like lightning, and the winner was already decided. The broken limbs of the losers fell to the front of the position like dumplings falling into a pot. This kind of battle damage that was measured in hundreds every minute was a spectacular sight to behold. For the Alliance soldiers on the mountain wall defense line, this was a great pressure. Because as the last air defense line, the Courage insect people, was broken through, they had to face a double attack from the sky and from the ground. Sometimes, when they were firing, a gargoyle suddenly swooped down from the sky and cut off their head. This was already considered a kind of luck. The most tragic time was when a recruit was hooked by the sharp claws of a gargoyle and was directly taken into the air with a hoarse scream. A group of gargoyles swarmed up and directly tore off his limbs. This was not the end. The gargoyle was probably under the command of a lich and was spreading fear in the Alliance's camp. It grabbed the wailing man and swung him around in the sky. No anti-air cannons were able to hit him, until an elven ranger shot the unlucky guy to death. Even so, the Scourge army still turned the poor guy into an immortal and then threw him back to the Alliance's position like a worm. But now, with the army of winged insects fighting the sea of gargoyles, the Alliance's infantrymen were much safer. They carried out their duties and repeated the actions of loading mortar shells and aiming mechanically. They used cannons, flamethrowers, grenades, and everything else they could think of to stop the tide of the undead army. In the sky more than 10 kilometers behind them, the battleships began to fire. The 400mm cannons brought about a destructive explosion. The largest area of the Scourge army on the plateau was wiped out. The violent explosion even collapsed the tunnel dug by the spider demons. It seemed that the Alliance had found the location of the frontline commander of the Scourge army and used heavy artillery to clear the area, directly destroying the Lich. The offensive of the Scourge army immediately stopped. The Lich King could indeed control any of the immortals in the Scourge army. But he couldn't divide his attention into 10 million parts and carry out precise control and command of every soldier. He could only make a general order, such as ordering 100,000 immortals to attack a certain area. As for which bunker and which cannon formation to attack, in fact, it still required the immortal commanders of different classes to carry out on-the-spot commands. Once they were eliminated, the Scourge army would be a bunch of blind flies and would be much easier to deal with. Seeing that the attack was ineffective, the Lich at the back stopped commanding and allowed the low-level immortals to be sent to their deaths. When the sound of the cannons gradually stopped, the earth elemental creatures under Alkavon started to take the field. They weren't cleaning up the battlefield but the land around them. It was because of them that the Alliance could avoid being dug by the spider demons to the rear. Chapter 1695. The battle reports from the past few days made the leaders of the Alliance feel gratified and fortunate. The Scourge troop was never a dish that could be easily eaten. On the contrary, the Scourge army that withdrew most of the undead to the Ice Crown Glacier was quite terrifying. An army of hundreds of thousands of survivors was already a huge pressure on the logistics department. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were under immense pressure. After all, almost all of their supplies came from the Eastern Kingdom. In terms of food, if it weren't for Rotterdam and Alterac that had become mass production areas again, Stormwind alone would definitely not be able to support such a terrifying amount of logistics. However, the Doomsday Army was simply cheating. The soldiers didn't need to eat, drink, defecate, or even sleep. Any ice cave or crack could be a hideout as long as there was a path for the undying soldiers to climb out. After killing the living, he cast a dark spell and immediately replenished the dead. Soldiers turned into soldiers, mages turned into liches, paladins turned into death knights. It was the same for puppets like the gargoyles. As long as they still had mana and a workshop, they would be able to kill 10,000 of them today and 10,000 more in a week. In the worst-case scenario, there would be more and more fights every minute. What about the allied forces? A warrior, even a human with the shortest lifespan, would need at least 16 years to produce a soldier. Not to mention the elves, dwarves, and gnomes with lower fertility rates and longer lifespans. Even after the Second Battle of the Door of Darkness, the races had encouraged reproduction, but they still had to grow up. Once upon a time, the Alliance was very confused about Duque secretly taking in the Kiraji insect people, and was even a little unhappy. After all, the Kiraj insect people affected the appearance of the city, and their level of civilization was quite low. When the flying insects of the Kiraji insect people replaced the griffins and hippogriffs as consumables in aerial battles, everyone had a completely different feeling. To some extent, the bugmen were the bane of the Scourge army. Their completely different physiological structure allowed the bugmen to basically ignore the plague of the Scourge army. At least, the plague that targeted the bugmen had yet to be developed. The bugmen were not picky with their food. As long as it was meat, it was fine. Duque tried to order the insects to eat the flesh of the abomination, but he found that the Kiraji insect people were completely fine. He really didn't know what kind of modifications Thun had done to them in the past to make them almost immune to poison. Then there was aerial combat. Aerial battles had always been cruel. Often, life and death would be decided in an instant in the sky, whether it was prepared or unprepared. Either the gargoyle was chopped into pieces, or the flying insect was killed and fell to the ground. When the bugmen fell to the ground, they would often be smashed into pieces. Even if the Scourge army wanted to resurrect, they would only be able to resurrect a pile of trash with no combat power. In the past, he didn't know that the Kiraji insect people's hard but not flexible limbs would have miraculous effects. From the looks of it now, the bugmen were a bit like suicide bombers. If they could not kill the enemy, they would destroy them cleanly, leaving no way out for the enemy. For a long time to come, Duque still needed the bugmen to wear down the gargoyles. In the past, the Alliance had used their powerful air force to destroy the insect swarm, but it had been very difficult to destroy the gargoyle army. At the end of the day, the gargoyle's defense was higher, and a 40mm Bofors cannon couldn't kill it. However, once the Kiraj bugmen with low defense hit their bodies, they were basically dead. However, in aerial combat, 2 bugmen would be able to kill 1 gargoyle at the risk of their lives. The bugmen didn't even need money, and even if they all died, their morale wouldn't be affected. Even the bug race themselves didn't care. Phew! The bugmen are really useful, but it's a bit harmful to the environment. Duque smiled bitterly. However, it wasn't the Alliance's territory, so who would care? Perhaps in the future, the Alliance and the Horde would be stationed here, but at least not now. The tragic war of attrition lasted from March to May. Regardless of whether Arthas admitted it or not, the Scourge army was still declining. Originally, there were millions of Undying attacking every day, but it became 1 attack every few days. Meanwhile, the Alliance fought steadily, advancing the trenches and artillery positions step by step. Everywhere they went, they would ask Alcavan to help solidify the ground. Even the spider demons couldn't sneak attack through the ground. No, in fact, there was one time when Arthas did gather a large number of spider demons and prepared to forcefully dig a huge tunnel to the rear of the Alliance to destroy the Alliance's supplies there. Unfortunately, this group of miserable spider demons encountered the Oros children that Duque had specially transferred from Silithus. These spider demons were nothing in front of the bigger bugs, who were even more formidable. This kind of stable battle strategy left Arthas at his wit's end. On the 3rd of May, Arthas' control was only left in the southwestern part of the Ice Crown Glacier. There were only 3 important places left in the periphery: the Dark Cathedral, the Door of Fear, Kale Issa, and the evil castle of Marikaris. On the Ice Throne, Arthas looked down at the 2 powerful existences, one big and one small, who were emitting demigod energy waves. Finally, his cold voice came from under the black helmet. Do you have any opinions about the recent situation of the Scourge army? Let me fight with Duke Marcus again. As long as I can snatch back my Titan runes. Maligos said through gritted teeth. My opinion is the opposite. I think that we should retreat. There's no point in defending the periphery, and we'll lose the elite liches and death knights of the army. Since the Alliance is going to attack the Ice Crown Fortress no matter what, we might as well destroy the enemy's main force in the fortress, the Sun King said. In the past, given Arthas's pride, he would definitely not agree. This was because it would mean that he was backing down and admitting that he, who had many soldiers and generals, would lose the overall situation. However, he did not object on the spot. Arthas said coldly, "Convince me." At this moment, the palm print on the right side of Anastrian's face, which was emitting dark energy, trembled because of the movement of his cheekbones. It's already very difficult for us to exhaust the Alliance. Our troops lack the ability to break through, and we can't kill many of them. Not to mention replenishing our forces. Moreover, even if we kill Duke Marcus outside the Ice Crown Fortress, he has a high chance of resurrection. However, in the Ice Crown Fortress, even if he's a demigod, if he dies in front of the Ice Throne, his soul won't be able to return to planet Azeroth. When the Sun King said this, Arthas's eyes lit up. At this point in the war, there was no such thing as mercy. If the Alliance couldn't take down the Ice Crown Fortress and eliminate Arthas, once they retreated, it wouldn't take more than a few years for the Scourge army to create an army of over 100 million immortals. There was no way the hundreds of thousands of people in the Allied army could stay in this barren land forever. Furthermore, apart from Duke and the dragon aspect, who else in the Allied army would dare to guarantee that they would be able to defend against Arthas's assault? Chapter 1696. Was face more important or substance more important? If it was possible, of course it would be face, but also practical benefits. Be it in history or in this life, Arthas was a pragmatist deep down. In the Stratholme incident in history, Arthas could hypocritically wait for the citizens to become undead before crying in the name of righteousness and purify the citizens of Stratholme. For the sake of the higher goal in his heart, he did not hesitate to tarnish his reputation when he was still the Prince of Lordaeron at that time. He ordered the massacre and dirtied his hands. Arthas finally had to face reality when he couldn't do anything about it. Withdraw the elites. With a mental command from the Lich King, the defense of the Calamity army at the remaining important fulcrums of the fortresses showed obvious signs of weakening. William, Magni, and Sylvanas, who were commanding at the front, and Kale, that's and Jaina, who were supporting and shooting from the rear, all felt the changes in the Calamity army immediately. Although the attack of the Allied forces was covered by the two floating cities of Dalagen and Naxxramas, which had been temporarily repaired, and avoided the pain of attacking from the rear, the endless number of Calamity army soldiers still brought great trouble to the advancement of the battlefront. It was different now. In the past, there would definitely be a Death Knight or a Lich in every key node or fortress to hold the fort. However, the attacks in the past few days were abnormally smooth, and they couldn't find any mid-level undead, let alone high-level undead. The undead that stayed behind would either rush out like a swarm of bees to be eaten, or stick to their own positions and only attack the enemies that entered their territory. As for their companions that were besieged and beaten next door, they would sit and watch as they were killed, and then wait for the fate of destruction to befall them. Is it finally time for the final battle? Duque gently tapped the command table with his right index finger, and then gave an order. Pass down the order. Let the Silver Hand and all the powerhouses above the Radiant Moon level rest for 3 days. The front line will be commanded by the Deputy General. Duque's order was quickly carried out, but it also attracted a rather unexpected visitor. Oh, fuck, why are you here? Naturally, it was Varrock Salyafar. This orc who was loyal to the great chieftain seemed to have aged a lot. Not only did he show signs of a hunchback, but his hair and sideburns were also much whiter than a few days ago. His only son was dead. Even if his hair didn't turn white overnight, it was more or less the same. Duque sighed. In a way, he was watching Salyafar die. If Putre was the mastermind and Arthas the culprit, then Duque would at least have an accomplice. Unfortunately, his race and position were different, so it was impossible for him to consider things from the perspective of the tribe. In a sense, young Salyafar was dead, and the tribe had lost the chance to produce a second Salyafar. Although the chances weren't high to begin with. But Duque respected Varrock. He was brave and loyal. In the original history, he was a brave warrior who survived from the first dark portal to the era when the army arrived again. Your Excellency Duke Marcus, I hope that I can at least join the Alliance's hero group as an individual. Duque looked at the weathered face and the pair of bloodshot, half-protruding eyes and sighed again. Duque could completely understand the tribe's actions. The tribe had sacrificed enough. An army of more than 200,000 had been destroyed in one day. 2 leader-level powerhouses had been lost at once. One was the strongest mage, and the other was a rising star who could have become the next great chieftain. It would be a miracle if Thrall didn't have any resentment. The tribe was now lacking in talents. If another leader of a large race died, such as Cain or Wajin, then the situation of the tribe would definitely fall apart. In fact, Thrall was absolutely against King Salyafar coming to attack Icecrown Fortress. On the surface, Thrall couldn't find a reason. Varrock continued, Dranos is my only son. He is a good child with the bravery and fearlessness of orcs, and a sense of the big picture that orcs often don't have. I once pinned all my hopes and future on him. Unfortunately, since fate has determined that the Salyafar family will be cut off, I have to accept this fate. All of a sudden Varrock's muscles tensed up, but in the end, not as a commander, not as a beastman, but as a father. Even if I can't save him, I must at least let him rest in peace. Father. This word deeply touched Duque's heart. He suddenly thought of the child in Aurelia and Sasha's womb. He had been a father for a long time. From the moment they were conceived. If he were in Varrock's shoes, he would probably go crazy too. Alright Vark, I agree. This is the resonance of being a father. You agree? Varrock still seemed to be in disbelief. This was because the sudden addition of an outsider could have a huge impact on the teamwork of the team. As the commander of the orcs, of course he knew how dangerous it was to have a subordinate who could possibly go berserk in an elite team with extremely low tolerance for mistakes. Thank you, Duke Marcus. Varrock did not know what else to say. His expression was a little stiff, and in the end he only scratched his head. Duque thought for a moment and chose to comfort Varrock, even though it made him feel like he was being hypocritical. But death is not the end. Even the Alliance can tolerate Darian Mograine and his Ebon Blade Knights. If we can successfully defeat Arthas, I'm sure many Undying will be able to break free and join the fight against the Burning Legion. That too. Varrock suddenly thought that his son might have a chance to return to him, even as an Undying. His son was still his son, and the soul in that shell was still the soul that had accompanied him for more than 20 years. Varrock's mood suddenly improved. Hope had not completely disappeared. After thanking him profusely, Varrock retreated. But at this moment, Duque thought of a rather serious matter that could not be ignored. The original history had long been messed up by him, this ruthless butterfly. If there was a goddess of destiny, he would definitely be the bastard who raped her countless times. But here came the problem. In order to prevent the undead from rioting, Bolvar for Dragon, who was burned by the flames and tortured by the idiot, succeeded as the Lich King and became the 3rd-generation leader of the Lich Kingdom after Arthas died. Now that Bolvar was alive and well, if there really was a Lich King, where would Duke find the noble and awesome soul to sit in the Lich King's position? Chapter 1697. Bolvar, who became the Lich King in history, was a Lich King who had no sense of existence. In a sense, he was not as famous as the 4 horsemen of the New Apocalypse, who later belonged to him. In any case, there was the former king of Torrential Fortress, Sora's Trollbane, and the white-legged Sally Whitemane of the Blood Dog couple. So, when Duque thought of this problem, he was still a little annoyed. I can't kill for Dragon just because there's a Lich King, can I? Duque laughed bitterly in his heart. One could not become a Lich King just because they wanted to. First, they had to have extraordinary willpower. Without willpower, there was no spiritual power, and there was no way to cross the void and control the immortals from thousands of miles away. Without willpower, even if they were placed on the throne of the Lich King, they would not be able to do anything. In his previous life, Bolvar was betrayed in the Gate of Wrath and then burned by Alexstrasza, who temporarily became the Minister of Foreign Affairs. His whole body was bathed in flames, and the plague virus in his body was burned to ashes, pulling him back from the brink of death. Of course, no one could withstand such a high temperature of the red dragon's flames. Bolvar's body was tormented by the flames, but he was already half alive and half dead. Later, the Lich King found him in the Gate of Wrath and brought him back to Icecrown Fortress, trying to turn him into a Death Knight to serve him. But Bolvar's strong willpower prevented him from obeying the Lich King. Bolvar had experienced the cruelest willpower training to become the third Lich King. Sigh. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Duque gave up on worrying about the future. Duque suddenly laughed bitterly. Arthas's car had not been overturned yet, and he was already thinking about the problem of his successor. Wasn't that a little too ambitious? Arthas retreating his troops back to Icecrown Fortress was not equivalent to a beautiful woman lying naked and begging for a frontal assault. On the contrary, it made the Scourge army into a tortoise's shell. Anyone who dared to underestimate this kind of strategic retreat would hit their head and bleed. Duque was still playing it safe. First, he had Gavin Rad and Theon lead the Silver Hand into the field and occupy the Dark Cathedral and the Evil Castle in the middle of Icecrown Glacier. Once he gained control of these two key mana vein nodes, he would be able to destroy the magic array that Arthas had set up in the Icecrown Glacier. Duque didn't even let Naxxramas or the Dalajan sit directly on either side. Instead, he asked Neru to purify it before personally setting up a magic array. Should I say, as expected of the filthy Demon Queen? Duque really did find something fishy about these two earth veins. It was a very secretive magic spell. If someone or a powerful magic system extracted mana from it, it would be fine normally, but once it entered 100% status, the spell hidden in the mana vein would be triggered and inject the will of the Lich King into the magic system. Tisk, have we been discovered? Dragon Lich Maligo spat. Anastrian, who had an ice skull on his head, laughed. How could that little trick fool Duke Marcus? After occupying 5 of the 6 mana veins in the Icecrown Glacier, Duque could finally announce that he had obtained overwhelming control of the magic net in this area. From this moment onwards, Icecrown Fortress would no longer receive an abundant supply of mana. As long as they were willing to work hard to weaken it, they would definitely be able to make the Icecrown Fortress lose its mana. Throughout the second half of March, the Allied army had been setting up cannons. From the Dark Cathedral to the Door of Fear, Kael'Isa, and then to the Evil Castle in the middle of the region, the Alliance had set up more than 5,000 heavy cannons with a caliber of 150 mm and above on this purified land. 3 new Gustav cannons, which were the most representative of the cannon doctrine, were placed behind the back slope of the Evil Castle of Malakaris, which had the highest terrain. Length, 42. 97 meters width, 7 meters height, 11. 6 meters weight, 1,350 tons caliber, 800 m length, 32. 48 meters weight, 400 tons shooting angle, plus 53 degrees shell weight, 71 tons, armor-piercing shell, 48 tons, high-explosive shell. In an era without missiles, such heavy cannons could be said to be a true killing machine. In order to avoid a repeat of the incident where Arthas had blown up Naxxramas with one big move, the sneaky Duque had ordered all of the 200 mm and above cannons to be moved to the back slope, not giving the two fools a chance to attack directly. After all, the trajectory of the cannons was a parabola. Azeroth was a planet, and the ground had a natural arc. It was basically impossible to see anything beyond 4 kilometers on flat ground. However, the new cannons, which used TNT as gunpowder, had a range of more than 10 kilometers. And Frostmourn's Fury could only be used for direct attacks. Unless Arthas broke out of the encirclement by 20 kilometers just to dismantle the cannons, the 3 Gustav cannons were absolutely safe. When Duque told this to Magni, This unkind damn dwarf laughed for a long time. Ha! I was worried that my baby would be hurt. Now it's all right. Lang leaned close to Duque and whispered, Big Brother is a classic example of forgetting his old love when he has a new lover. Previously, he kept muttering that the caliber of the new ship cannons was not as good as the small steel cannons from back then. Later, after the Alliance gave him money to build these giant cannons that can shoot tens of kilometers, his resentment subsided a little. Duque smiled bitterly. The small steel cannons, that had once ended the second battle of the Dark Portal were, in the end, mortars. They could not shoot far at all. In a tactical sense, how could they compare with this kind of killing machine that could shoot tens of kilometers? In the future, we will build bigger cannons. Magni shouted loudly. Duque smiled but did not say anything. In the future, that was the era of missiles and laser weapons. However, in order to test Arthes's reaction, as far as the eye could see from Ice Crown Fortress, there were old cannons that could be pulled into a museum. They still had power, but it was just a pretense. Even the gunners were the mechanical gnomes under Mimiron. It's a pity that there are no more mechanical gnomes. Duque was speaking the truth. In the limit left by Titan, there could only be 1,000 mechanical gnomes at most, and 2,000 mechanical dwarfs. This was the absolute authority given to Mimiron. Otherwise, if there was an unlimited number of them, just Mimiron's robot army alone would be enough to drown the entire Calamity army. Mimiron, who was standing at the side, had electronic light flickering in his eyes. He suddenly said, Duke Marcus, if I can obtain Titan's authorization, the limit of my control will be 10 times the current upper limit. After saying that, Mimiron fell silent again. To be honest, Duque still did not know how to interact with Mimiron. There were many times when Duque could not find any common points with him. It was like chatting with a robot. He could not start a conversation. On the other hand, Mimiron was also quite supportive of the Alliance's battle. Sigh, can we only slowly interact after the war? Chapter 1698. There had never been a large-scale battle that ended in a single battle. The more he led a large-scale battle, the more Duque felt moved by this saying. If he wanted to end the war quickly, he might end up like the gates of heaven's wrath in history, smashing his head against a fool who had the advantage of geography and manpower. Arthas herself was powerful enough. She also controlled the mana veins of the entire Ice Crown Glacier. Second-rate fighters like Bolvar and young Salyafar would be annihilated if they ran into her. After spending so much time to seize the geographical advantage and reduce the total number of soldiers of the Calamity army to an acceptable range, Duque finally began his attack on the Ice Crown Fortress. Even so, Duque still divided the allied army into echelons and sent them up one by one. The sky above the Ice Crown Fortress was always dark and gloomy, and the wind howled angrily. Ever since the explosion of the ancient Kalandor continent, this gloomy chill had persisted for tens of thousands of years. The wind cut like a knife. Even though it was already summer, the temperature in the Ice Crown Fortress was not higher than -20 degrees. The soldiers of the Allied army put on thick cotton-padded jackets and gloves, wrapping themselves up like dumplings. Even their faces were covered with thick goggles and half-masks. Only the hot air coming out of their mouths and noses showed that they were alive. Asterisk whoosh. Whoosh, asterisk 1 to 5 dazzling blue pillars of light rose from different directions of the Ice Crown Glacier. Those were the magic formations on the 5 mana veins of the City of Calamity, the Castle of Evil, and the Cathedral of Darkness. Each formation was overseen by a top-notch radiant moon mage, such as the great astromancer Solarian. They chanted complicated incantations and used hand gestures that mortals would never understand to slowly fine-tune the energy output of the mana veins. Admittedly, all the formations had been personally drawn by Duque using the Titan runestones. The specific effects still depended on the spellcaster. Raising his head, the Lich King's gaze pierced through space and landed on the magic pillars of light. He quietly watched as the pillars of light grew brighter and brighter, connecting the heavens and the earth, as if they could reach the other side of the universe. Your Majesty, don't worry. The magic power of the 5 branches combined is not as great as that of the Ice Crown Fortress, the Sun King comforted Arthes. Anastrian was telling the truth. The ice-crowned citadel had not been built randomly. It had been specially chosen by Nazul when he descended upon Azeroth. That first-generation Lich King spread his mind power throughout Noscent and searched for a long time before picking this place. Then, while strengthening his own forces, he dispatched various undead as craftsmen to build this unique ice castle. Although the 5 mana veins in the surroundings were very powerful, they were only about 70% of the ice-crowned fortress strength. However, when the 2 floating cities, Naxxramas and the Dalajan, appeared in midair in the distance to the southwest and southeast of the ice-crowned fortress, Arthas suddenly had an ominous premonition. "No, I'm going to destroy a floating city first," Arthas said as he stood up. Just as he was about to make a move, there was a sudden rumble in the sky. It was a line of fire falling from the distant sky. A huge comet fell diagonally, breaking through the dark void, smashing through the thick clouds, burning the cold winds in the atmosphere into blazing turbulence, and finally aimed at the ice-crowned citadel. Arthas was no stranger to this scene. AI. This name was almost squeezed out from under the heavy black helmet. It was the moon goddess Elun. Azeroth was the only true god, and this was after excluding Si, Thun, and the other evil gods. Although Elun had never truly descended upon this land for unknown reasons, this did not prevent her from participating in this war in her own way. On a high platform facing the northeast of Naxxramas, Tyron stood against the wind, her green hair and snow-white priest robes fluttering in the wind. The mysterious moonlight transcended the barrier of day and night and descended upon her, communicating with her and communicating with her. The goddess used her sharp eyes to lock onto her target. Her physical and mental strength were pouring out like a broken dam, and for a moment, even Tyron felt like she could not hold on any longer. Soon, a smile appeared on that holy and heroic face. The final adjustment had been completed, and the rest was up to gravity. Perhaps Arthas could try using a light cannon to see if it could stop the meteorite from falling, deflect it, or something else. Elun would naturally protect this falling meteorite with her divine power. No matter what Arthas did, Elun's goal of consuming the magic power of the ice-crowned citadel would be achieved. Behind the Lich King's helmet, there was a clear anger in the pair of deep eyes. "Send it to me if you have the guts." When passing through the atmosphere, the strong friction would cause the meteorite to burn and reduce its weight. Even so, when it fell to the ground, there would be at least 1,000 tons of meteorite. Coupled with the terrifying kinetic energy, even the sturdy ice-crowned citadel would not be able to withstand a meteorite head-on. This was an open plot. An open plot that Arthas could not resist. A beam of white light that seemed to freeze everything in the entire field of vision was shot out from the ice-crowned citadel. Arthas finally made his move. Frostmourn's Wrath. The white freezing beam collided with Elun's purple and blue meteorite in midair. It burst into a dazzling brilliance like fireworks. Ah, so beautiful. Jaina, who was guarding Naxxramas, felt as if she had returned to her childhood when she first saw fireworks. Next to her, Duque smirked. "Wow, the Lich King is angry again. Damn it, let's see how many times you can be angry." Duque happily snapped his fingers, and Khadgar, who was next to him, immediately understood. 5 minutes later, on the 2 floating cities of Dalajan and Naxxramas, huge pillars of light also lit up into the sky. On the frozen throne, Arthas suddenly lost his voice. What? If he was not wearing the full-face helmet that covered all his expressions, his face would probably be very ugly right now. 5 earth veins, plus the 2 floating cities, a total of 7 fulcrums formed a strange magic array. 7 beams of light pierced the sky, and as they were about to penetrate the atmosphere, countless glowing Titan runes began to spread. They emitted a mysterious radiance, and in a way that Arthas could not understand, they finally formed a huge circular magic array. The earth trembled slightly, and the entire continent of Northrend was dyed purple and blue. It was as if the sun had risen at the end of the night, forcefully and domineeringly erasing the stars and the moon from the sky. There was only one color left in the world. Chapter 1699. Countless soldiers of the Allied army witnessed this scene. Everyone's mouth was unconsciously half open as they sighed in astonishment. This was a grand scene that only existed in epics. Even though Duke's generosity had refreshed their knowledge time and time again, but every time, they would still be fiercely shocked. Duke. On the frozen throne, Arthas let out a voice filled with incomparable resentment. At this moment, how could he not know what Duque was planning? The combined energy of the 5 mana veins was indeed unable to reduce the overwhelming mana of the Ice-Crowned Fortress, but with the addition of the 2 floating cities, it was a different story. As the 2 most important mana nodes of the magic net, the Dalajan and Naxxramas were not only the mana hubs under Duque's control, but also the largest mana storage and an important connection between the 4 major elemental realms. Arthas could never have imagined that Duque could actually connect these 2 unrelated mana nodes with the mana veins to form a huge magic array, which in turn surpassed the transcendent status of the Ice-Crowned Fortress. In the sky, the huge Titan runic magic array emitted a dazzling brilliance. Finally, all the mana condensed into a pillar of light that would take about 10 people to wrap their arms around, and fiercely fell from the sky, pressing down on the Ice-Crowned Fortress. The moment before the pillar of light hit the Ice-Crowned Fortress, Arthas refused to let his efforts go to waste, because this fortress at the top of the snowy mountain was the symbol of his control over this land of ice and snow, and even the future of the entire land. On the dark black castle, there was an uncomfortable pale light, and an even thicker white pillar of light rose against the sky, colliding with the purple and blue pillar of light falling from the sky. At first, the white light strongly counterattacked, once raising the position of the collision to 2 kilometers above the castle. But as the magic array continued to descend more abundant and purer mana, the white light was once again suppressed. Finally, 2 terrifying pillars of light, 1 purple and 1 white, condensed about 500 meters above the fortress, forming a state of mutual exhaustion. Squeak. It was hard to describe this sound with words, but it could only be said that it was more like the sound of electricity. In the command room of Naxxramas, Duque was expressionless. He had already handed over the maintenance of the magic array to a few of his subordinates. He believed that Khadgar, Jaina, and Kael, these veteran powerhouses, would not disappoint him. Duque raised his right arm up high and brought it down heavily with a knife-hand posture. Fire! In the command room, in close to 100 large and small images, each cannon let out its own unique roar. The continuous explosions of the cannons condensed into a ball in the air. It sounded like the entire frozen mountain range had suddenly collapsed. The terrifying feeling of the entire mountain shaking left all the Alliance soldiers dumbfounded. Even though they were wearing earplugs, the rumbling sounds that they associated with the scene still made every gunner feel like they were temporarily deafened. That ear-piercing buzzing sound made his brain feel like it was splitting apart. In front of the ice throne, the dragon Lich Malygos glanced at his master and snorted coldly. Roar! On the outer wall of the Ice-Crowned Fortress, every relief, every terrifying sculpture, came to life. They turned into gargoyles powered by dark magic, or obsidian statue guardians. They flapped their heavy wings, and under the drive of magic, they rode the wind elements beneath them and quickly flew into the air. With their stone bodies that had nothing to do with life, they welcomed the torrential rain of cannonballs. Rumble, a series of explosions, one after another, formed a huge chain of explosions, connecting from the leftmost end of the Alliance soldiers' field of vision to the rightmost end. If they didn't turn their necks, no one could see the entire scene. Keep shooting. Don't stop. Keep shooting. Don't be afraid even if your chamber explodes. Bulang Bronzebeard ordered fiercely. Malygos quickly discovered that this kind of meat shield tactic could not last long. The gargoyles could still take the cannonballs with a caliber of less than 200 millimeters and perish together with them. The cannonballs above 200 millimeters tended to have a faster initial velocity, and with too many cannonballs, it became more and more chaotic to deal with. Moreover, the Alliance's cannonballs were pouring down like they were free, and the number of gargoyles that could be mobilized was decreasing. Bang, bang, bang. More and more cannonballs began to explode on the magic shield of the Ice-Crowned Fortress. The so-called magic shield was never an absolute defense. It was nothing more than using energy to offset the external impact and energy. When there was too much external energy, or the impact per unit area was too strong, the shield would break. Everyone could see that if this continued, the ice-crowned fortress would not last long and would be hit directly by the cannonballs. Your Majesty, please make a decision. Anastrian lowered his ice skull and bowed deeply. No, I'm not willing. Arthas's ferocious roar contained too much unwillingness. Your Majesty, please make a decision. Anastrian emphasized again. Fine, I'll listen to you this time. I'll definitely make Duke Marcus and his damn alliance pay the price of destruction. I'll make them all crawl in front of me like dogs. Arthas was practically roaring these words. Outside, Bulang was absolutely confident that if Arthas did not do anything, the entire ice-crowned fortress would be drowned by modern cannons. That Gustav, with an 800mm caliber, could definitely cut this ugly fortress into half. Seeing that the magic shield of the ice-crowned fortress was showing signs of collapsing, the huge fortress suddenly fell into a trance. As if separated by a layer of hazy mist, the entire fortress looked illusory. Boom, boom, boom. The cannons that had never stopped continued to pour cannonballs. Something strange happened. The moment the huge cannonballs touched the mist, they suddenly slowed down. The cannonballs that could only be seen with the naked eye all slowed down as if they had fallen into an extremely viscous paste. Their speed became slower and slower. Finally, in front of an unknown mysterious force, they were crushed and exploded. Even if they exploded, the range of the explosion was very small. At most, the flames and shrapnel of the explosion could only reach a meter away. Then, the entire cannonball disappeared without a trace. What the hell is this? In the sky, there was no longer white light fighting against the purple and blue cannonballs of the giant Titan rune magic formation. When the terrifying energy of the Titan, which should theoretically be able to destroy heaven and earth, crashed down, it merely caused the entire fortress to fluctuate in confusion. It was like a ripple caused by a small stone thrown into a calm lake. That was all. Chapter 1700. In the command center of the Naxxrama's alliance, every leader, including Duque, stood up. They could not hide the shock on their faces. What the hell was this? Cannonballs could not penetrate, and even the Titan's energy could not affect it? Why don't you just fly in the sky? Suddenly, the door to the command center opened. Tyron was still in the position of pushing the door open. Duque could see that there was something wrong with Tyron's eyes. Her pupils had also turned white. It was not the white of the scara, but a strange kind of white that could be distinguished from the scara of her eyes. That psychedelic glow made Duque think of a possibility. Duke Marcus, Arthas is going all out. That is, the Lich King's domain. As soon as this tyrant spoke, Duque knew who she was. Elun? Yes, the situation is a bit urgent. I attached a little of my will to my high priest. Sorry, Elun said. Duque narrowed his eyes. He realized that there was something that Elun did not want to talk about through divine descent like before. He asked tentatively, domain? Of course, Duque knew what a domain was. He was just not sure if the domain he knew was the same as the one in front of him. Look at the sky, Tyrant, who was possessed by Elun, said loudly. Everyone looked at the open skylight. There was still a dark cloud above their heads. Nothing. Wait. This evil aura was getting thicker and thicker. Elun smiled bitterly. Finally found out? I just found out. It seems that we have all underestimated Arthas. In fact, he is opening the largest canopy of the undead in history. From the day you set foot on this continent to prepare for the punitive expedition against him, he has been carrying out this step. Wait, if it is the canopy of the undead. Duque was confused. He is hiding very well, pretending to be defeated. In fact, while you are consuming the Scourge's troops, you are also helping him spread the aura of the undead into the sky. Once this huge canopy of the undead is completed, all the creatures shrouded under the canopy will be forced to gradually transform into undead. All the dead skeletons and wandering souls would be completely transformed into higher-level undying beings. Just now, Arthas finally launched the sky screen. Duque didn't say anything. He noticed that Elune had used the word ruthless. Look. Elune pointed with her finger. Countless undyings appeared in many of the videos. They emerged from the crevices of the cliffs, from beneath the snow, from the tiles of the ice-crowned fortress, and from the cracks in the decorations of the fortress walls. Originally, the undyings would have appeared as ambushers and caught the attackers off guard. Apparently, they didn't know what had happened. They actually ran out of control. This is, Elune said with certainty, I was right. Activating such a wide canopy of undead far exceeds the upper limit of the Lich King's control, so the price is that Arthas has to give up 99% of his undead subordinates. It was no exaggeration to say that the Doomsday Army was in a state of collapse and chaos. Since he had paid such a heavy price, Arthas's only choice was to try his best to recoup his losses. Magni clenched his teeth. Good. Arthas is ruthless. At this moment, Arthas's sole voice resounded in the sky. Have you finally found out? Unfortunately, it's too late. The great kingdom of the undead is already under construction. You will all become my people, my slaves. Don't even think about it. Servanas scolded. It's too late. Perhaps you demigods are immune to my death curse, but as long as you are immortal, you will not be able to escape from my palm. Even if you leave Northrend now, the death curse will still accompany you and accelerate the countdown of your life. When you return to your warm homes in Lordaeron to reunite with your families, you will become the most ferocious undead, bringing your family, your friends, and your loved ones into the kingdom of the undead. Arthas's huge, illusory head laughed maniacally in the sky above the ice-crowned fortress. He took off his helmet that symbolized terror and revealed his original appearance. Arthas, who used to be so handsome, now had a head of white hair that looked like a dead man's. His face was firm and well-defined, and now every curve of his face was full of evil and madness. His cheeks trembled, and the stubble on his chin looked like the hand of a devil. It's not too late. Tyrande, who was possessed by Elune, pointed at the ice-crowned fortress. As long as I defeat you before this canopy of undead is completed, everything will end. Hearing Elune's shout, Arthas stopped his maniacal laughter. He suddenly said, Yes. Come in. Come into my stage of righteousness and evil. Only the performers who stood on this stage could truly hurt the other party. Come, Duke Marcus. Come. Fools who think of themselves as righteous, let us fight it out in the ice-crowned fortress. With that, Arthas's huge illusory head disappeared. Jaina pondered for a moment. I think I understand what that damned realm of his is. Only those who are righteous or evil can enter. Those who are not on the stage cannot interfere with those on the stage. That's about it. Damn it, the Alliance's greatest advantage in long-range attacks has been nullified. Everyone was a little annoyed. They had originally wanted to fire their cannons and bombard the Alliance. But now, it didn't seem like it would work. Oh, Duque chuckled at first, then turned into laughter. Elune, you possess Tyrande because you have started to suppress the expansion of the canopy of undead in the air, right? Yes, that's right. I'll leave the sky to you. Elune reminded, all right. However, the magic formation formed by the 7 nodes must be preserved. Otherwise, Arthas can switch back at any time and replenish his mana through the magical veins under the ice-crowned fortress. Then Jaina and Kale, that's the 7 of you stay here. Understood. Understood. Duke turned his head, his fierce gaze sweeping across every leader's face. Everyone, what the allied army is going to do has never changed from the beginning. Since Arthas desires destruction, we will grant him destruction. Alliance heroes. Attack, oh! In the command center, every Alliance leader raised their fists high. Thousands of Alliance professionals formed an assault team around the ice-crowned fortress. They rushed in from all directions and launched a fierce attack on the wandering undead. At the same time, Duque led the experts of the Alliance to the Avenue of Death in front of the ice-crowned fortress. Chapter 1701. There was no need for Duque and the rest to take action personally. The first wave of the Allied army's charge had already been launched. Darian Mograine's huge rune sword slashed down, and the Death Knights of the Black Edge Knights charged directly from the west side of the Ice Crown Fortress. The steep mountain terrain could not stop the skeletal warhorses under them from leaping over cliffs as if they were walking on flat ground. As long as it was not a 90-degree vertical slope, these undead horses could perform acrobatic moves under the mental control of the man and horse as one. On the east side, the Silver Hand Knights also launched an attack. This was because the two gods of the Silver Hand, Gavin, Rad, and Theon, wanted to join the hero squad. This time, the Silver Hand was decisively handed over to the standard second-generation paladins, led by the two female paladins, Mara Fordragon and Lena Thunderspear. For a moment, Duque was a little worried, but then Duque felt relieved. After all, these two were in history with Trajan, and their statues were stored side by side in the Paladin Profession Hall as a memorial. If not for the fact that there were too many paladins in the Alliance and that they were too strong, without the two ancient gods holding the fort, these second-generation paladins would probably have taken over long ago. Now it seemed that the female paladins of the Alliance were also very fierce. The Silver Hand led by the two female paladins was like a sharp knife cutting through butter, easily destroying the Scourge soldiers who had lost the direct command of the Lich King. A hammer to the left and a holy seal to the right. Even playing polo was not as satisfying. Unfortunately, the Alliance hero squad could no longer accommodate so many paladins. In addition to these two, there were also more famous and strong paladins like Riadaline, Marad, and Iriel the Hoof. Well, the Alliance did not have many things, but the paladin hero squad had a lot of them. If it were an ordinary profession, the one who would clear the field the fastest would definitely not be the mage. But after the Radiant Moon, no one could compare to Pharaoh. Oh ha! In front of the hero squad, a dwarf shot out arcane impact with his short arms in turn, smashing the undead blocking the Ice Crown Fortress into pieces. He was Millhouse Mana Storm. Originally, Duque did not want this guy to join the hero squad. However, not only did this guy recommend himself, but he also said that he wanted to get a spaceship for interstellar travel. Because of this fellow's erratic personality, Duque would never place him in a position that required a steady personality like guarding the magic formation. However, it would be a waste not to use a peak Radiant Moon Pharaoh, so he might as well use this as an excuse to ask the Draenei on his behalf. In the end, it was as if this guy was on steroids and had a strong desire to show off. Of course, he alone would not be able to clear thousands of undead. In front of the hero team, there were two elite teams leading the way. They were the champions of the Alliance and the Horde who had shown in the Crusade. Sal had made up his mind to preserve his strength, but a group of his subordinates could not hold him back and took the initiative to ask for battle. Duque gave Sal a call. Proved. Humph. I've killed 18. I have 30. You have the nerve to show off to me after slaughtering the weakest skeleton? We're just elite monsters. Alliance warrior Sakagar bickered with Horde warrior Nahawk Steelbreaker, his hands not holding back at all. In any case, their main task was to open the way for the hero squad, and it was up to them how far they could go. Seeing them, Duque did not expect Tyrion to say with emotion, "It's good to be young." Duque rolled his eyes. "You can come to me and get eternal life." Tyrion was silent. Duque did not try to persuade him. After all, Anduin Lothar had chosen to end the last of the Arthi royal bloodline through natural death. It was not only to open the way for future generations, but also to set a noble example. Even though Lothar was not a paladin, the paladins had always unconsciously used him and Wother Lightbringer as role models. So, looks like I'll have to wait until Return of the Legion to persuade them. People can change and fate can be changed. Duque had already done so much and gained so much success. He had to do his best to save this world that could be destroyed at any time. Walking up the long staircase sandwiched between two high platforms with goat horns, they stepped onto the huge platform that overlooked half of the Ice Crown Glacier. Stepping on the ferocious-looking skeleton relief, they looked at the huge corridor that was more than 50 meters tall, and looked at the statues of evil spirits on both sides that emitted violent flags. Everyone in the hero squad cast their eyes on the huge vortex at the end of the corridor. It was a teleportation portal. Arthas had activated her domain, rendering long-range attacks ineffective and protecting the entire Ice Crown Fortress from the attacks of cannons. However, the real interior of the Ice Crown Fortress was behind this teleportation portal that was full of unknown things. At the entrance, everyone stopped and looked at Duque. At this moment, other than Jaina and Kale, that's who were in charge of guarding the 7 teleportation points, as well as a group of second-rate mages like Solarian, it could be said that the strongest people in the Alliance were here. In addition, there was also Lord Howl in his heroic spirit state and Varrock Salyafar. "Let's go. Let's end this," Duque said calmly. He gently reached out to the teleportation portal and used his demigod power to connect to the already stable teleportation portal. He was making sure that his group would not be teleported to some unknown place. Duque did not notice that Theon was tightly gripping the hilt of Ashbringer in his hand. After a short teleportation, the scene in front of them made the heroes murmur. Everywhere was filled with an evil icy mist, the bone-chilling floor, the ominous statues that always stared at people, and the huge chandelier that seemed like it could fall at any time and crush people to death. Everything gave people a feeling of fear and unease, but there were no enemies. This is the final battlefield, right? Arthas is not qualified to be the host. Even if there's number 21 gun salute, at least a few skeleton soldiers can come and play grave disco to liven things up. Gavin Rad whistled frivolously. This, of course, attracted the chuckles of many heroines. Only Theon frowned. Gavin Rad, all right. Don't take it too seriously. You're just too serious. You're so young, but your hair is already moving upward. The veins on Theon's forehead bulged, the cross-shaped veins as obvious as they could be. One had to know that he was just over 50, and with a head of slightly orange hair and a full beard, he was considered a handsome man in the Alliance. On the contrary, although Gavin Rad was a handsome man when he was young, he had the momentum of developing into Mr. Mediterranean. If not for Duque teaching him to tie his hair in a bun, his image would be ruined. Just as Theon was about to explode, he suddenly remembered and smiled bitterly. "Thanks, brother." Chapter 1702. Those who were not directly involved would never understand the friendship between the 5 Silver Saints that people spoke of. This relationship had spanned a quarter of a century and had never faded, let alone been forgotten. As staunch believers of the Holy Light, they had wondered if they would die before they could fight the orcs and be destroyed by the high concentration of the Holy Light. After all, at that time, the Holy Knight was only a profession that existed in the theories of Archbishop Alonso's Vale. Azeroth had been recorded for 2,800 years. Was it that easy to be the first in recorded human history? Absolutely not. On the night before the change, although they had absolute trust in Alonso's, they still followed their teacher's instructions and left a will. For the next 14 years, they fought on all fronts. They had thought that they would die on the battlefield, under the axes of the orcs, under the claws of the demons, or even under a terrible curse. But none of them had thought that they would die in the hands of their own disciple. Gavin Rad and Theon, the brothers around them, knew better than them how much Uther had invested in Arthas. The most painstaking teaching, the most magnificent teaching assistants, and the most perfect training lineup. What Uther wanted to teach was the perfect next generation of holy knights that combined all the strengths of the 5 of them. Unfortunately, with the success of Nizul's plot, not only did everything come to nothing, even their most respected brother, Uther, was killed. Did they hate Arthas? The answer was absolutely yes. This was definitely not pure hatred, because pure hatred would only make the holy light covered in dust. This would make them completely deviate from the path of the holy light. The 4 of them were more eager than anyone else to end things with Arthas, the Lich King. Even after the disappearance of Sidon and Turallion, Theon and Gavin Rad firmly believed that if they were still alive, they would definitely continue to have the same feelings. In the face of the impending danger of Azeroth again and again, they were willing to obey orders to deal with the enemies in front of them first. This did not mean that they had forgotten about Uther and Arthas, who was still at large. The Holy Knight was not a profession that used the holy light to encompass everything. In addition to holy and protection, the Holy Knight also had the most important punishment. There was also a key skill called reckoning. Today, here now, this was the day of reckoning for the 4 silver saints. 2 stalwart figures walked in front of the group, one on the left and one on the right. One of them was carrying the Dorleth Ashbringer, and the other was carrying the harpoon-like Windchaser sword. The surging energy rippling from the 2 divine weapons seemed to confirm the excitement of their owners. Looking at them, Duque pursed his lips. Duque knew that he was not the star of the show today. There were no enemies in the cold and deep corridors and palaces. Perhaps, even Arthas knew that it was impossible for the Calamity soldiers to overwhelm this hero team with numbers. This was because Duque was one of the experts who had entered the Ice Crown Fortress. Along the way, Duque constantly relied on the system elf to analyze everything in this domain. He was surprised to find that Arthas didn't restrict his access to the elements, and even allowed him to extend the weave into Ice Crown Castle. This made Duque deeply suspicious. What was Arthas up to? It was only after reaching the 5th floor that there were changes. Very abruptly, the scene in front of every hero's eyes was cut apart. More than 10 black lines cut everything in their field of vision into pieces. This wasn't an illusion. Space was really being cut apart. "Protect yourselves!" Duque shouted sternly. This shout was actually just instinctive. The moment space was cut apart, it was already destined that the sound transmitted through the air would not reach the ears of the hero team. Duque waved "Ush," and immediately discovered that a strong suction force was sucking him to a huge square. Originally, Duque didn't want to follow the other party's wishes. When he sensed the other party's aura, Duque changed his mind. In the darkness, a square entered Duque's vision at high speed. The ground was covered with patterns of skulls, the dark green carvings, the surrounding towering pillars, and the layers of concentric patterns that looked like chrysanthemums in the middle of the square made Duque immediately realize where he was. Wow, that's interesting. He's actually welcoming me in the territory of his dead wife. This was indeed a part of the Ice Crown Fortress. It turned out that here, the players would face Maligo's wife, Syndagosa, who had turned into an ice dragon. Unexpectedly, after Syndagosa was beaten to a pulp, the one guarding this place would be Maligos, who only had half a body left. "Yo, Maligos, you want to deal with me alone? You think too highly of yourself, don't you? Get Arthas out here." Duque had a smile on his lips, his expression full of mockery. Maligos opened his mouth, which was basically only left with bones. The dragon's mouth, which was barely attached to dry lips and muscles, let out a furious roar of the soul. "Despicable thief! I still have a score to settle with you. Don't worry, you won't have the chance to meet the great Lich King." Faced with Maligo's anger, Duque didn't care. He scratched his head. "If you can come at me together, why do you have to die one by one? You're courting death again." Maligos didn't fully understand what he said. But Duque's contempt was real. Du-ku, the terrifying dragon's roar shook the entire palace. Countless icicles that were originally frozen on the pillars and decorations of the main hall's plaza fell down one after another and fell to the ground with a crisp, ping sound. It wasn't just Duque. Almost the entire team of heroes had been torn apart by the spatial trap just now. When he fell from the sky, what appeared in front of him was a huge monster that could tentatively be called humanoid, 6 stories tall. It stood on 2 legs with only 2 toes on one leg and 4 on the other. The left claw had 3 withered bones, and the right had 4 palms still wrapped in rotten flesh. Its left shoulder was a huge mouth. Wrapped in fangs, there was something that looked like a scapula. On the huge right arm, there were 2 crooked arms. Its facial features were also very random. One eye was at the back of its head, one was below the crooked left corner of its mouth, and several more eyes were on its belly, arms, back, and other places. Obviously, this was another disgusting monster stitched with forbidden black magic. If Duque were here, he would definitely recognize this as one of the bosses of Ice Crown Fortress, Rotten Intestines. On the other side, Gavin Rad was equally dumbfounded. F***CK. I'm about to throw up the bread I ate last night. Unfortunately, he encountered rotten intestines brother, rotten noodles. Chapter 1703. F***CK. I'm about to throw up the bread I ate last night. Unfortunately, he met rotten intestines brother, rotten noodles. In addition, William encountered the undead creature, Lord Malorger, which had 4 skulls. Magni against Lady Fallen Whisperer. Elucia and Curia to Professor Putterside. The highlight was when the 3 demigods fell in front of the frozen throne. Onyxia, Vashch, and Sylvanas, the 3 demigods could be said to be the strongest in the alliance apart from Duque. Oh, what a good plan. So the Lich King only knows how to bully women? The human form Onyxia swung her long black hair with her right hand and put on a charming expression. On the frozen throne, Arthas did not move at all. After taking off his helmet, his pale face showed a rare look of ridicule. The great Azeroth guardian dragon actually has the cheek to say that you're a woman? Sure, I'll open a portal for you. You can leave Icecrown Fortress by yourself. After saying that, Arthas actually opened a portal surrounded by a frosty aura. The top of the portal reflected the scenery outside. As long as Onyxia stepped out of the portal, she would be able to return to the Alliance's camp near the Castle of Evil. The problem was, would the Black Dragon Princess dare to do so? She had finally made a name for herself under Duque and developed from a pitiful mount to a harem. If she dared to escape on her own, Duque would peel off her dragon's skin and beat it like a drum. Glancing at the side, she saw the silent Sylvanas and Vashch, who was quietly watching her performance in a maid's uniform. Vashch aside, Sylvanas would never abandon Arthas, his opponent, and leave. If Duque was here, there would still be Duque to suppress Sylvanas. The main point was that Duque wasn't here. 15 years after the Door of Darkness, the calamity of the Eversong Forest, the destruction of the old Silvery Moon City, and the deaths of millions of his compatriots. Although the betrayal of the Sun King played a part, ultimately, it was still because the Calamity army led by the culprit, Arthas, was too strong. Now, Nizul, the mastermind, and Arthas, the culprit, had merged into one. Sylvanas, who was determined to take revenge and had even changed her race's name to Blood Elf, would never let go of such an opportunity. Looking at the lightning snakes that were constantly jumping around her body, it was obvious that she was ready to fight. Onyxia did not know how strong Arthas was, but looking at his Frostmourn's fury, she knew that she would definitely not be able to defeat Arthas. She didn't think that any of the 3 of them could stop the Lich King. She only knew that if she really ran, Sylvanas might be dead. How could Duque spare her then? The hesitation only lasted for a moment. In the next moment, she caressed her face and teased, "Oh, so annoying. Such a small portal, you want to send away, who?" When she said the last 2 words, not only did Onyxia's voice become stern, she also transformed into her original form, the fearsome Black Dragon Princess. "Sister Sylvanas, if you don't mind, how about we fight the enemy together? Ignore the one in the maid uniform." "Okay." In the next second, Sylvanas turned into a stream of light and disappeared on the spot. When she reappeared, she was already standing on the back of Onyxia's neck. If there was a fatal weakness for a dragon, it would be here. There would not be any other place. Because this was the most difficult place for a dragon to take care of. Vashch laughed faintly, and at the same time, she also turned into a 6-armed Naga. In the past, she would always hold a bow, but this time, her 6 slender arms were all close combat weapons. Nagas were not only sharp archers and mages, but also the sharpest close combat experts at the same time. Arthas was probably smiling, but the smile on her face was getting more and more radiant. Yet, for some reason, it gave off the feeling that it was a fake smile that didn't reach the eyes. He did not put on his helmet and just stood up, holding Frostmourne, and walked down his ice throne step by step. At the same time, the most shrill alarm suddenly sounded in Naxxramas. "Not good. Our spatial portal has been unlocked for some reason." A radiant moon mage cried out. "Got it." Without saying much, Jaina took off her coat and quietly put on her epic-grade cloak. When she slowly walked in front of the portal in the center of Naxxramas with her staff in hand, dozens of translucent, illusory skeletal palms appeared out of thin air. After an ear-piercing sound that was almost like scraping glass, the last barrier in front of the portal was completely destroyed. An incomparably dark door opened, and a great lich with a head that was completely different from its body stepped out of the portal. How disappointing. So the Alliance left you here to die? The one who came was the former Sun King, an Astrian. Jaina's expression was incomparably calm. She had a look of understanding on her face. An Astrian, do you really think we didn't expect you to attack Naxxramas? As Jaina's voice fell, the portal behind the Sun King suddenly made a crisp, crack sound. 1/10 of a second later, the portal he opened was crushed by an illusory red dragon claw that suddenly appeared. Less than 3 meters behind him, the humanoid red dragon sister appeared with her hands on her waist, standing there lazily. The name of the Dragon King was the best interpretation of strength. The Red Dragon Queen teased, "Oh, Arthas didn't miscalculate the comparison of strength, did he? He actually dared to send you out?" It wasn't just Alexstrasza. Not far to the right of the Sun King, a portal formed by the swinging of fire elements opened, and a figure familiar to the Sun King stepped in. "Isn't this the son who betrayed me?" If the Sun King still had muscles on his face, this would be an extremely sarcastic and mocking smile. Unfortunately, a skull made of ice could not express any facial expressions. "Kill," that said softly, "I came today to make a final end to our relationship, father." JJGAGA. The sound of the ice skull's upper and lower jaws constantly opening and closing was quite unpleasant to hear. A Nastrian laughed. "And no, my child, as long as you are my child for a day, you will always be my child. You can't get rid of the destiny that I have bestowed upon you." The Sun King spoke with such certainty that it gave Kale that's an ominous premonition. Could it be that this former father of hers had some sort of backup plan? Chapter 1704. Haha. Alexstrasza was the first to laugh wildly. "Haha. Bones, so you didn't become a lich, but a clown? What a good joke. I haven't heard such a funny joke in 20,000 years. The red dragon Big Sis smiled beautifully. One could see the outline of her exposed abdomen. Jaina's face was cold, and she spat out her venomous tongue mercilessly. "Enough. Anastrian, your dirty soul that betrayed your people has no right to talk about inheritance and the fate of your descendants. From the moment you sold your soul to the Lich King, you are nothing but a pile of smelly bones." Only Kale, that's the former prince who used to smile gently and elegantly, now had a gloomy expression. But his clenched fists and the few arcane fireballs spinning faster and faster behind him revealed the excitement and resentment in his heart. Only the Sun King seemed to be sizing up his surroundings with the ghost fire in his icy eye sockets. The Red Dragon Queen finished laughing. She put her hands on her hips and raised her head. "Did Arthas miscalculate something? Did he think that by giving you the skull of a divine artifact, he could make you a real demigod? Or do you think that you are my mash?" The Red Dragon Queen puffed out her chest proudly. As the leader of the Pentashade Dragon Kings, she had her own pride. She did not think that the Sun King was her match. Anastrian seemed to be laughing. "Ha! If we fight face to face, I am indeed not your match, big lizard." The Red Dragon Queen raised her eyebrows and puffed out her cheeks. Her anger was easy to understand. Sure enough, he changed the topic. "But who wants to fight you face to face? Perhaps you still don't know why I want to use Naxxramas as a breakthrough point?" Jaina's eyes were half closed. He was right. If he attacked the magic vein nodes guarded by the Radiant Moon mages, he might be able to severely injure them with the first blow. Jaina said coldly, "Because Naxxramas used to be a fortress belonging to the Scourge, right? What a pity. This fortress has been completely remodeled by me and Duke." The Sun King raised the gray index finger of his right hand and shook it proudly. No. Even the Lich King himself doesn't know the true use of Naxxramas. Actually, this floating fortress isn't a real fortress. At this point, he deliberately kept them in suspense. Even though the two Breaking Dawn mages were vaguely eager to hear the rest of the story, they remained clear-headed and had already stealthily reinforced their magical defenses. Jaina further confirmed the weave's control over Naxxramas. The Sun King smiled, and the upper and lower jaws of the ice skeleton once again made an uncomfortable and frightening quack sound. Naxxramas was originally used as a prisoner's carriage to describe it in a more convenient way. The moment Anastrian uttered the last word, he activated the spell he had been hiding for a long time. Without giving Alexstrasza any time to react, countless rays of light suddenly shot out from the void and crossed the space, forming dazzling chains that directly locked onto her robust body. The Red Dragon Queen let out a rare cry of surprise. No longer caring that this was a rather narrow teleportation hall for her, she brazenly activated the ultimate transformation spell. Who knew? Almost at the same time that her limbs and neck thickened, the chains actually became thicker and larger at the same time. They tightly bound her body, and a purer Titan energy burst forth. Not good. Quick, stop him. From the left and right, the blazing fire element and the bone-chilling frost element combined to form the most powerful frost-fire arrow, which poured fiercely onto the Sun King's body. For Jaina and Kale, this was the safest way to fight. The original Sun King must have specialized in the fire element. When the two of them saw the ice skeleton that imprisoned Nazul, they couldn't be sure. After all, the Lich King's signature element was frost. Since they could not be sure, they simply used the Frostfire arrow. That was because this mystical spell would cause the most damage based on which element the opponent had the weakest resistance to. In order to deal with today's battle, the two had spent a long time practicing. But it did not seem to be effective. The Sun King let out a hair-raising sound like an owl. The extremely exaggerated ice shield on his body, with at least 30 layers, firmly resisted the joint casting of the two. At the same time, he continued to drag the Red Dragon Queen into this mysterious prison. Jaina and Kale, faces were as white as a sheet. They had miscalculated. Just as no one said it, no one would know that Otter's true purpose was to imprison the ancient gods, and the rest were secondary purposes. Used to seeing Naxxramas flying around as a flying fortress, who would know that this thing was originally used by the Titans to imprison dangerous species or local gods on a certain planet and transport them back to the Pantheon for research? Jaina gritted her teeth and suddenly shouted, "Torim!" A huge figure appeared almost in response. He punched through the wall of Naxxramas' teleportation hall, and his huge body, so huge that it was difficult for mortals to look up, squeezed into the teleportation hall. Torim, whose eyes were bursting with Titan energy and lightning, hammered down, and an explosive ball of lightning exploded where the Sun King stood. Unfortunately, he seemed to have activated Flash at the last moment and dodged it. Torim's rumbling voice echoed throughout the teleportation hall. "I didn't expect you to find such a loophole. Damn you, Malygos." Needless to say, to know such a top secret, it was definitely not the Sun King, who only had a lifespan of thousands of years. Only Malygos, who was also a guardian, would keep such a secret. Jaina's hands were not hesitant, and a series of spells followed. "Sun King, do you have the ability to lock all the guardians in the prison?" The Sun King could not help but feel a little bitter at this time. How is this possible? As the strongest dragon aspect, Alexstrasza's strength was definitely the top among the guardians. Unless it was the demon's soul that had her own soul back then, how could she be suppressed so easily? One dragon aspect was enough to give the Sun King a headache. However, the Sun King actually had a backup plan. But since I have inherited Nazul's ice skeleton, it also means that I have inherited his huge mental power. With his evil words, an incomparably terrifying mental energy pressed toward Torim, Jaina, and Kale, at the same time. Chapter 1705. Even though Duque had already reminded them to prepare protection in this area, Jaina and Kale, still felt overwhelmed. They both knew that this was under the premise that the Sun King did not use them as the main target. Torim, who was on the other side, was in the most pain. His huge body knelt down on both knees, his hands clutching his temples hard, and his mouth made indistinct sounds. Ah! Although most of the guards near the teleportation hall of the fortress had been secretly invited away, there were still some paladins here in order to avoid being discovered by the enemy that might invade. At this moment, all existences below the hero level let out painful howls. Jaina's forehead was full of cold sweat. She had to admit that she had miscalculated. Alexstrasza's mistake and being trapped was the biggest miscalculation. This meant that the strongest combat power on the Allied forces' side had been directly sealed, even if it was very likely to be temporary. Khadgar, do you hear me? Can you do anything? Jaina urgently called for help through the magic net. I have no choice. Perhaps no one in the Alliance is good at resisting mental attacks. But I know of one existence. Go! Jaina shouted in the sea of consciousness. Inside Naxxramas, a mental shock wave that was 100 times stronger than the raging waves repeatedly washed the nerves of every living creature in the fortress. Soldiers with weak mental strength had already begun to bleed from their eye sockets and ear holes. If this continued, a large number of people would die here. Tholth's face was pale, and he cried out in his heart that he had miscalculated. Duque had calculated that the Scourge army might use this former Scourge fortress to cause trouble, and even that an Astrian might come in person. Unfortunately, Duque had miscalculated the strength of this Sun King. No one had thought that Arthas would actually give the ice skeleton that Nazul had used before to the Sun King, making his strength so terrifying. In just a few seconds, the tens of thousands of soldiers in the entire fortress were completely paralyzed. Everyone almost suspected that it was not an Astrian who had come, but the real Lich King Arthas. At this moment, a female voice suddenly came from the void. The voice was clear and cold, but it gave people a sense of confusion. It was as if the voice was not a voice, but an auditory hallucination. It was this voice that instantly brought an Astrian's unending spiritual waves to a halt. It was the haze of day. It was a jade-colored dream. Jaina suddenly realized who she was. An illusory and beautiful green dragon head appeared in the air above the teleportation hall. Even though the head had shrunk a lot, everyone could easily recognize it as Isra. It's not that simple, is it? The Sun King spat and had no intention of retreating. Isra, who was in charge of the Emerald Dream, might not be able to leave due to the changes in the dream world. It was still possible for him to help out a little. After all, the ones here were not the undead who had been forced to step into the realm of the dead and had no resistance against mind control, but thousands of living humans with vibrant bodies and surging vitality. Even the demon of 1,000 throats, Yogg-Saron, who was also a master of mind control, did not dare to guarantee that he could control a guardian in an instant. Even for the other guardians who were betrayed by Loken, Yogg-Saron had to spend a long time peeking into the target's mind and breaking their hearts from their weaknesses before he could truly achieve a more perfect control. You have no chance. What awaits you is only eternal annihilation. Isra roared. The green dragon mouth opened, and a rainbow-like dragon breath that kept changing colors crossed the void and shot towards an Astrian. Annihilation? The only ones who will be annihilated will be you stubborn living beings who resist to the end. As soon as he finished speaking, the upper and lower jaws of his ice skull opened and closed in a strange manner. It should be laughing. A huge ice coffin appeared. The other two Breaking Dawn archmages wanted to treat it as ice barrier. Although they were both within the scope of magic, the nature of this huge ice cube was not that kind of thing. The Sun King's main body was like a salted fish sealed in ice. His entire skeleton was completely sealed by the ice, and every possible place where he could move was completely sealed. Jaina, Kale, and Khadgar, the three great pharaohs' faces paled at the same time. Using an ice coffin made of extremely pure ice elemental essence to seal himself in was not necessarily the best form of protection. Normal archmages could only maintain ice barrier for 10 seconds at most. The demigod Lich was obviously not restricted by this. As long as the outside world could not break through this ice coffin of such purity and hardness, he could basically stay in it for as long as he wanted. But everyone present could feel that the Sun King was using this method to protect his body. At the same time, he was spreading his spiritual power everywhere and beginning to invade the fortress magic net system. "Stop him!" Kale, that shouted in shock. As one of the few pharaoh in the alliance, the former elven prince also used the magic net. After all, the magic net was too convenient and efficient. However, he was very clear about his own identity. So, although he had a very high level of use, he did not have the right to control it. The highest level of control of the magic net was naturally in the hands of Duque, and the second level was in the hands of Khadgar and Jaina. Now, they were shocked to find that Anastrian was actually thinking of Naxxrama's magic net node. They were really shocked and angry. The core of the magic net was in Karazhan, and the second-level nodes were Naxxrama's and the Dalajan. The main cities of the Alliance were the third-level nodes. If Naxxrama's was taken, and Duque was not there at this critical juncture, there was no guarantee that Anastrian would have an even bigger idea. He could use spiritual control to invade the magic net, and even control the entire magic net and Karazhan, which could be used as a channel to cross astral planes. Without Kale, that's reminder, Jaina was already doing it. But she retreated from the teleportation hall like lightning to a medium-sized magic control node at least a kilometer away from the central area. As soon as she entered the magic net, she found that she could not stop it at all. A human could coordinate and control their own hands and feet, but how many more hands and feet would they have? This was no longer a situation that could be described as flustered. Her mind was immersed in the magic net. Even though Jaina had extremely high authority, she could only command a few spiritual energy balls at the same time to attack, suppress, and counter the spiritual invasion of the Sun King. Now, there were at least 1,000 spiritual attacks on the magic net at the same time. Even though this was the control node on the periphery of the magic net, Jaina already had the illusion that her territory was falling inch by inch, and she could do nothing about it. Chapter 1706. Multitasking. 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 These were the same concepts, but they were on completely different levels. At best, Jaina could multitask. Dealing with 10 or so people at once was already her limit. Karthika had been dead for 26 years. He had been shocked by Duque's 100 hands, and by spreading out his spirit to read multiple books in Karazhan's library, he had trained his spellcasting abilities. After so many years of training, Karthika had turned himself into a super spirit world creature that could do hundreds of conflicting things at the same time without messing things up. Karthika's abilities were already very exaggerated. What was more hateful was that the ice skeleton kill Jaden had personally created gave Anastrian the ability to control more than 1,000 spiritual energy beams to attack the weave. No, we can't hold on any longer. In the weave, Jaina and Karthika cried out in despair at the same time. Karthika had called for help, the dark witch Farina and the great astromancer Solarin. Not enough. A drop in the bucket. Jaina gritted her teeth, open up access to all Morning Star and above wizards in the Alliance, and ask for their help. Don't hesitate. No matter how bad it is, it's better than being taken away by an Astrian. At most, I'll go ask for forgiveness from Duque. Jaina made the final decision. In the next second, Jaina's voice rang through the entire weave. I am Queen Jaina Proudmoore of Cultivation. The weave is now under attack by the former Sun King, an Astrian Sunstrider. I request all weave users to help repel his attack. On the other side, Jaina was trying her best to resist the Sun King's spiritual attack. On the other side, Kale, that had summoned his phoenix. He risked self-destruction to merge with his phoenix once more, obtaining the power of a demigod. This was because his dead father's ice coffin was getting bigger and bigger, and he had no choice but to use high-purity fire elemental magic to resist the expansion of the ice. Beside him, Torim had already retreated. Under this level of spiritual attack, he could not do anything at all. That damned lich. Torim cursed fiercely. This was because the flaw in his mind had already been found, and the illusion of his deceased wife was constantly attacking his spiritual sea. It was unknown if Anastrian had been forced to switch from playing with fire to playing with ice, resulting in some unknown flaw. He also attacked Kale, but his mental attacks were mostly neutralized by Kale, blazing mental fire. The situation suddenly entered a stalemate. Otter's guardians were all mentally flawed. If Tarim could not handle it, then the other three were even more so. It would be hilarious if Freya were to come up and be forcibly controlled to betray them. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Sun King alone was holding up 6 demigods and 2 Breaking Dawn powerhouses. Perhaps we've all underestimated the Lich King. Jaina could not help but think of her childhood friend. The fierce battle continued in Ice Crown Fortress. "Be careful!" Just as William shouted, Valilla, who was beside him, leaped away. Almost at the same time that the female elf dodged, a terrifying storm descended. Lord Malorger, an undead creature with green soul matter as its core and white bones as its support, brazenly unleashed a skill similar to Whirlwind Slash. The white bone spikes that were fixed on the soul energy ball suddenly opened up and spun at a high speed. It looked more like a terrifying blender. Everything that was touched by the white bone would be crushed into pieces. What made William's scalp tingle was that after Lord Malorger unleashed Bone Storm, he was advancing towards Brawlbearskin, who had just been hit by a huge Lord of Calamity's thorn. A huge bone spike had pierced through this elven druid's waist. It was unknown if Brawl's internal organs had exploded. No matter who it was, being pierced through the abdomen by such a 2-meter-long bone spike that was as thick as a human thigh would definitely be in excruciating pain. Even under such extreme pain, Brawl was still yelling for William to ignore him. William gritted his teeth and leaped high, finally using his precious leap slash skill to smash the bone spike on Brawl's body. Actually, he had unknowingly made the right decision. Almost at the same time that he destroyed the bone spike, Brawl rolled to the side and dodged the bone storm of the undead leader. Blood splattered all over the ground, and William could see an organ that looked like a pig's kidney almost falling out of the big hole in Brawl's waist. Brawl's eyes were sharp, and he quickly scooped it up. "No need to look. He won't die just yet." Valilla pulled Varian back. Although Brawl's face was extremely pale, his chanting and his hand gestures were not messed up at all. A ball of emerald light rose from his palms, and he pressed it onto his abdomen. The huge bloody hole started to heal at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. In just 3 to 5 seconds, the bloody hole disappeared, and in its place was a new belly. Brawl laughed bitterly. "I just barely managed to get my organs back in place. I need at least 3 minutes to recover about 30% of my battle power." William's hands trembled and he clenched his teeth. "Leave this battle to us." In countless life and death battles, Brawl had guarded their backs. This time, it was their turn to protect this respectable brother of theirs. William merged the 2 divine weapons in his hands, forming a huge divine sword. His sharp gaze swept across Lord Malorger's body. "For skulls are not enough. You better have 1,000 heads for me to chop off." In the next second, he turned into a strong gust of wind and blew towards the huge undead leader. On the other side, in a hall filled with skulls, Magni and Chandri's Feathermoon were fighting against the Church of the Cursing's Lady Deathspeaker. The flames from the Balrog's warhammer engulfed a huge humanoid monster that was as tall as 3 people. However, more monsters continued to pour out from the side doors on both sides of the hall. More than 10 supporters and zealots of the Church of the Cursing chased after the seemingly weak General Feathermoon. She was over 10,000 years old, but because she was Tyron's adopted daughter, she was a generation lower. While Tyron was talking to the leaders of the Alliance as equals, Chandri's was rather bitter. It was destined that she could only vent her frustrations in battle. Even though she was being chased by more than 10 powerful believers of the Church of the Cursing, this elven general who was in charge of guarding one side of the hall lightly stepped on a pillar 3 times and flew into the air. Chapter 1707. Chandri's twisted her body in midair and shot an arrow. Her next move was almost mistaken as a Naga's, mortals couldn't shoot 3 arrows simultaneously, or 5 rounds of 15 arrows in a second. What was more terrifying was that the arrows were shot at the ceiling of the hall. When they flew in midair, they actually split into pieces. The fanatical believers looked up at the densely packed light spots. After they hit the ceiling of the hall, they did not bounce randomly. Instead, under the influence of a mysterious power, they were reflected back at a predetermined angle. The arrows whistled through the air and easily pierced through the bodies of the believers. In an instant, the side of the hall seemed to rain blood. The entire side of the hall looked like it had been plowed by Zhu Beiji's rake. Several rows of cursed believers fell. Lady Deathwhisper waved her skeletal hand. The believers who had just fallen into the realm of death stood up slowly. They were already immortals. Oh! Seeing their companions stand up again, the fanatical believers all let out excited voices. Immortality! Immortality! This was their greatest pursuit. The Feather Moon General sneered at the brainwashed undead. As she raised her arm, a rain of dazzling purple ribbons streaked across the void and shrouded the undead's heads. In the next second, the newly born immortals who had not fully climbed up had already turned into a pile of rotten flesh and blood. You want to be immortal forever? This is the immortality you want. Xianxia spat on the ground. Unexpectedly, Lady Deathwhisper raised her arms and shouted, "No one can escape from this world of death." Lady Deathwhisper used Mana Barrier to block Magni's attack right in front of Xianxia's. Then she used Death's Wither on Xianxia's. The stench of death spread out. Mortals would die just from smelling it. Even though Xianxia's physique had greatly increased after entering the realm of hero, she still did not dare to take this attack head-on. To make matters worse, when she was rolling around, she was hit by a paralysis curse. She was a priestess and also a ranger, but she did not have a way to dispel the curse. At this moment, in this place where there was no profession that could dispel the curse, she could only take it head-on. Magni, have you settled it? Xianxia's was not as easy to talk to as her adoptive mother tyrant. He didn't care if his foster mother was Magni's equal or not. He would get angry when he needed to. Immediately, Magni was also having a headache. The lich in front of him was too stubborn. She actually dared to take on his Balrog hammer with her shield up. He had wanted to conserve his strength and use all his strength to hammer Arthas, but now he no longer held back. He crushed a bead in his pocket. This was a treasure the rock guardian Alcavan had given him, and it was filled with the purest earth element. Hiss! Magni was on drugs. The dead shorty had become a big shorty. Its body was as large as a giant's, and it possessed unparalleled and terrifying strength. Combined with its massive burning warhammer, Magni Bronzebeard had directly taught Mistress Deathwhisper a lesson. Shio! Shio! Her powerful frost arrow originally had terrifying lethality against any close-range combatant. At this moment, it was completely impossible. Bam! The shield was destroyed with a single strike. Bam! 2 strikes knocked them over. Bam! 3 strikes whipped the corpse. The opponent, who seemed to be evenly matched just a moment ago, was defeated by Magni in 3 moves. The disciples of the cursed god sect were scared out of their wits. When they screamed and tried to run away, Xianxia shot them to death like she was shooting rabbits in a hunt. Every corpse was given a small bottle of holy water, and the corpses started to have an unexpected chemical reaction. The corpses, whose souls and bodies had been corroded by the darkness, started to melt as if they had been poisoned by the corpse dissolving water. Everything was done. Xianxia looked at this giant that was 3 stories tall, and his width was even greater than his height. She couldn't help but put her hands on her waist and scolded, "Hey! Why didn't you use it earlier? Hurry up and become small. We don't know what's going on with the others. We better hurry over." Magni glared. "It's not that simple. I have to expel the earth element out of my body if I want to become small. Once I do that, I won't dare to absorb it again. If the earth element is contaminated by the shadow energy, I will turn into a large death knight and smash you in the face." Xianxia looked at the entrance of the hall that was too narrow for Magni and curled her lips. She was clearly saying, "Do as you see fit." Magni rolled his eyes. He could only expel half of the earth element. In the middle of the ice-crowned fortress, King Varrock Salyafar was swinging his axe and smashing his son, who had become a scourge death knight, at Dranos Salyafar. Behind the father and son, who were separated by life and death, was Grom Hellscream, who was silently watching the battle with Blood Howl. Lord Howl was silent. The father and son before him represented the greatest sin of the Scourge army. It was already sad enough that the old had to bury the young. Now, the father had to bury his son again and destroy him with his own hands. Ignoring the continuation of life and trampling on the ethics of the human world, this was the Lich King's doing. Grom basically didn't make a move unless he saw the mutated blood fiends summoned by young Salyafar. These inferior monsters could bully professionals who had just stepped into the realm of heroes, but against a top-tier hero like Grom, it was a piece of cake. What was even more amazing was that young Salyafar was a typical blood death knight. His moves were useless against Lord Roar, who was a pure energy creature. This gave Lord Howl more confidence to hold the line for Varrock. For the Lich King, poor child, not every small battlefield was dominated by the allied army. There were clear victories, and naturally, there were also those who were at a disadvantage. Although the allied army was the cream of the crop from tens of millions of people, those who could obtain a place in the Scourge army, which had hundreds of millions of undead soldiers, were not weak either. The entire ice-crowned fortress was filled with fierce battles. In the square of the hall that originally belonged to Syndagosa, Malygos attacked Duque with beautiful magic while provoking him with words. "Ha! Are you ready? Soon, you will see your Sylvanas transform into the queen of the undead. And that little female dragon of yours, and that filthy Naga." With a wave of his claws, Malygos summoned another terrifying ice storm. This was Ice-Crowned Fortress, Arthas' home ground. In terms of dominating the ice element, the Lich King's faction had an absolute advantage. Duque didn't just use the fire element to fight against it. Chapter 1708. Arthas was sitting on a magical ley line, while Duke was using the wirelessly connected weave to exhaust his mana. There was a natural gap between them. Duque very cleverly summoned over 100 hands of magic and used Arcane Barrage to continuously defeat the icicles that were flying at him. When Malygos gave up control of the frost element, Duque slowly seized control and purified it with holy magic. "Ha! His Majesty the Lich King is already killing your woman. You stole His Majesty's woman, and now His Majesty is here to steal yours." Malygos kept spewing trash talk, which made Duque quite unhappy. Malygos was a madman. Duque had known for a long time. Not only was he arrogant and crazy, but he also had no integrity. In the Battle of Ancient Times, if he hadn't let the weakened blue dragons attack Neltharion in a rage, the blue dragons wouldn't have been wiped out, and his wife wouldn't have died just like that. After his wife died, he was afraid that his wife's ghost would haunt him, so he let her grieve in the far north for 10,000 years. Later, when his wife's corpse came back to life, Malygos didn't clean up after himself. Instead, he had sex with a red dragon girl who could be his daughter in the Magic Pivot. He even played sadistic games and tortured her into insanity. Duque never knew why there were players who liked Malygos before he transmigrated in his previous life. Anyway, this guy might have been a bit like a Dragon King before the Battle of Ancient Times. After that battle, this guy didn't do anything good. Even in his experience, Duque couldn't find anything excusable. Malygos' mouth really angered Duque. Wasn't Duque afraid that Sylvanas would become the undead queen again? Of course he was. Before he transmigrated, Duque still had some longing for the valiant Sylvanas who wasn't queen, but now Duque didn't think about it at all. Who would want the woman who had been by his side for so many years, who was connected with him, and who was even willing to have children with him to suddenly become a cold and terrifying corpse? Get lost. Only a moron would be willing. To be honest, Duque couldn't wait to destroy Arthas as soon as possible. He wanted to completely eliminate this terrible possibility that was infinitely close to zero. There was a moment earlier when Duque still had a chance to break through Arthas' trap, or at least bring Servanas back to his side. But when Duque discovered that Servanas' fighting spirit had skyrocketed after sensing Arthes's aura, Duque decided to give up. If you love someone, you must accept all of them. Duque looked forward to the Queen of Greece, who seemed to have walked out of the illusion into reality. He loved her courage to take responsibility for what she did and her courage to break free from her fate in the face of adversity. Naturally, he had to accept her anger and hatred. Not only Queen Sylvanas, but the Windrunner sisters would never let Arthes go. However, eldest sister, third sister, and fourth sister buried this hatred deep in their hearts, while Servanas showed it all on his face. Let her be. If she didn't try, if she didn't do her best, she wouldn't give up. The only question now was, would Arthes defeat Queen Sylvanas first, or would Duque take care of Malygos first? After a few minutes of probing, Duque had a rough understanding of Malygos. Among the undead dragons, bone dragons that fought with basic instincts and under the command of high-level undead were the weakest. Because after losing their elemental dominance and spell-casting abilities, bone dragons seemed very strong, but in reality, they couldn't even beat a living dragon of the same level. After all, muscles and tendons were quite obvious bonuses for a dragon's melee attacks. One level higher were ordinary ice dragons. They already had bones, and because they still retained a relatively complete soul, they could control the elements and release simple frost dragon breath. Among the undead dragons, one level higher were like Syndagosa. Although she had lost the ability to think independently, 10,000 years of hatred made her soul extremely powerful. Magic was based on the existence of the soul. The strength of the soul also led to the improvement of spell-casting ability. If not for Malygos, the one standing in front of Duque today would have been his dead wife, Syndagosa. And the highest level was undoubtedly an undead dragon like Malygos. Because Dracolic's specialized spell-casting abilities, the price they had to pay was that they couldn't preserve the power of melee to the greatest extent. For the blue dragons that relied on spells to survive, this was the best choice. If not for the previous interception, which cut Malygos' body in half and intercepted the Titan runes, Malygos in the form of a Dracolic would probably be even more powerful. Frankly speaking, even with a large number of Titan runes in the elemental domain, Duque really didn't dare to say that he could suppress Malygos, who had the geographical advantage. Perhaps this was the main reason why Arthes had specially sent him to stall for time. Ha! Hate your powerlessness. Lament that your women are going to become undead. Duke Marcus, this is your punishment for offending me. Once I kill you, you and your women will become my slaves. I will torture you. I will torture you for 10,000 years. Malygos, who was in a state of madness, kept shouting. Duque didn't know if he should curse at the Blue Dragon King who had completely let himself go after the fall. In the sky, the dancing snowflakes quickly gathered at one point under the Dracolica's control. In less than a tenth of a second, they formed a giant icicle that was big enough to pull the pillars of Orgrimmon. When he threw the icicle at Duque, dozens of shining blue arcane missiles pierced into the icicle like spears. The arcane energy killed the frost elements and caused an intense explosion. The destructive power spread out and accelerated the icicle's collapse. The splashing frost elements in the form of ice shards and mist shot countless snowflakes in all directions. This scene was like the fireworks that Duque had seen on New Year's before he transmigrated. Unfortunately, there were only two monotonous colors, snow white and arcane blue. Ha! Duke Marcus, you're finished. As long as one member of the hero team dies, your invincible legend will be shattered. They will immediately join the Calamity Army and defeat the heroes that you're so proud of one by one like a snowball. Just wait to face the Calamity Army formed by your women and subordinates. Is that so? Duque smiled faintly. He had to admit that Malygos' words were a little bit right. All along, there had been too many powerful people who died in the early stages of history. When the return of the Legion came, there was always a sense of heartache. For so many years, Duque had been holding the command of the hero team. This was what he was afraid of. Victory kept accumulating, and Duque was a little worried again. He was like a nanny or a spoiler, telling everyone the enemy's strategy in advance and then winning. Would such a victory be able to temper a strong individual to take charge of an area? Chapter 1709. The alliance was getting stronger and stronger. However, after Duque came to power 15 years after the Dark Portal, the new ballads that were sung in the taverns lacked a sense of history. A victory without sacrifice could preserve vitality to the greatest extent, but on the other hand, it couldn't sharpen the strongest will. Gradually, Duque discovered that there was an uncontrollable blind optimism in the upper echelons of the alliance. Yes, the 3 leaders of the Burning Legion had fallen, or at least that was what it looked like. The 2 ancient gods had also been defeated. What could stop the alliance's hero team? No one said it, but that was what they all thought. In such a good situation, it seemed that everyone was a little complacent. Duque couldn't imagine what would happen if they continued to maintain this mentality when facing the Burning Legion's apocalyptic attack. But he couldn't deliberately lose a battle of this level. He could only hope that there would be a suitable battle. It was difficult. Phew! Letting out a long breath, Duque's eyes became determined. He understood his future path a little bit, to delegate power and let the leaders face the storm alone. This path might be difficult, and it would be accompanied by blood and sacrifice, but it was necessary. But before that, he had to defeat Arthas first. The magic that was bombarding him seemed to have nothing to do with Duque anymore. He fell into a strange state of tranquility. A tish was raised high in his left hand as if to show off, and the bright arcane light almost blinded Maligo's ghost eyes. In fact, Duke's right hand, which was behind his back, was actually holding his Song of Light and Shadow. System Elf, activate Arcane Storm in 10 seconds. Understood. In 10 seconds, the situation on the battlefield, which had almost become a fixed pattern, suddenly changed. Maligos was caught off guard by this fierce attack that came almost without warning. The aura of almost squeezing out every drop of magic power really shocked Maligos. According to his estimation, not only did Duque exhaust the magic power of the magic circuit in his body, but he also didn't let go of the magic power of the external magic net circuit attached to it. For a mage like Duque who grew up in the orthodox way, arcane magic was the absolute foundation. Without the support of the arcana technique, it would be difficult for him to use the ice and fire elements smoothly. Duque's actions were tantamount to destroying his own foundation, at least in the short term. Is Duque mad at me? Or is Sylvanas really his reverse scale? Maligos sneered in his heart. Both of them were top-notch magic elemental magic. In a situation where both of them had similar levels of mystery and concentration of elemental magic, the deciding factor of victory was no longer magical techniques. The key to victory was usually the amount of elemental reserves, vitality, and magic resistance of each other. From Maligos' point of view, he had the support of the Lich King's magical ley line, while Duque had the magic net that connected the 4 major elemental realms. In a situation where they could not cut off each other's elemental supply, this battle would become a long one. That was exactly what he wanted. He believed that the Lich King would finish his battle before the outcome of this battle was decided. It would be difficult for Sylvanas, who only used the wind element, to break through Arthas' defense. While the power of lightning was impressive, it would be difficult to defeat Arthas, who had the home advantage. When her offensive weakened, it would be the end of the battle, and Arthas, who had more stamina, would win. Maligos did not know that Duque had made the same judgment faster than him. Tens of thousands of arcane energy beams, which looked like turbulence but were actually precisely calculated by the system, shot out in less than 1/100th of a second. They collided with each other, and then bounced out at all kinds of unimaginable angles like pinball balls. Faced with such an exaggerated and seemingly chaotic group attack, Maligos did not react at first. He thought that it was absolutely random. That was until he saw, to his shock, that the ice storm he had pushed out to meet the arcane storm was easily destroyed. Every ice prism was blown up by an arcane energy ray that was shot at the most scorching angle at the most precise angle. Be it large or small, the ice elemental clusters were all scattered, turning into true elemental turbulence. For the first time, Malygos found that he had lost control of his large-scale spell. The ice tornado, which should have been spinning wildly in a clockwise direction, suddenly showed signs of collapsing. Left with no choice, Malygos roared and stretched out his claws, using almost all the ice elemental clusters he could summon at that moment to pour into the ice tornado in front of him. Under his all-out attack, the ice tornado, which had been slightly scattered and shrinking, expanded again. Its size was at least twice as large as before. But Malygos immediately realized that something was wrong. The arcane storm's energy beam was still spicy and tricky, but the total amount of arcane elements injected was obviously not right. This was a classic case of a lack of follow-up. Arthas could not completely exclude other elements from entering the fortress, so naturally he could not completely cut off the magic power and elemental supply from the magic net to Duque. This seemingly unexplained drop. Ha! Malygos roared angrily and spat out a mouthful of dragon breath at Duque. The former Dragon King's dragon breath was powerful. But in the eyes of an elemental sculpting expert like Malygos, dragon breath was simply a torrent of energy. It was powerful, but the efficiency of using the elements was too low. He couldn't care so much. Under his nervous gaze, he didn't know if he was lucky or not. The dragon breath that gathered the incomparably pure ice elemental clusters was like a raging wave. It easily eliminated the interference of the large and small arcane energy beams and hit Duque, who was originally standing on the steps of the square. There was no ice barrier, no magic shield, not even a trace of panic. The moment before Duque was completely engulfed by the frost dragon breath, Malygos saw the mocking smile on Duque's lips. That was the smile of a cunning scheme succeeding. At that moment, Malygos felt that his heart, which had stopped beating long ago, seemed to have regained its vitality. Then, because of the most intense shock, it suddenly jumped. "Not good!" Malygos cried out. "It's too late!" At that moment, 100 meters above Malygos' head, an arcane energy cluster that seemed to be unable to cause any damage to the Dracolich suddenly exploded. The real Duque appeared. At the same time, Duque shot out like a cannonball and crashed into Malygos at high speed. With a thought from the Dracolich, ice dragon ghosts of various sizes appeared in the void beside him. They opened their mouths and released countless powerful ice elemental magic attacks. These spells hit Duque, who was charging down at high speed. It was like a surging wave crashing into the bow of an icebreaker and then parting to the sides. However, the waves that were knocked away were made of white ice elemental lines. Chapter 1710. This is, as if mimicking the constriction of a human's pupils, the two soul flames in the eye sockets of Malygos' dragon skull shrank instantly. The muscles on his face that had dried up due to the loss of life could not reflect the former Blue Dragon King's shock and anger. However, the elemental waves on his body clearly showed that he was temporarily out of control of the surrounding elements. Even if this temporarily only meant less than 1/10 of a second. In a battle between demigods, this was enough. The ice elements that were thrown out were harder to retrieve than water that was spilled. On the surface, it looked like he was going all out, but it turned out to be Duke's bait. Malygos played all his cards at once. It was a classic big move that missed the enemy, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. The ice dragon spirits that he summoned were the soul cores of the ice dragons that Duque had destroyed in Rotterdam. After Malygos, the Blue Dragon King, surrendered, Arthas was no longer interested in holding on to these dragon spirits. He only wanted to hold onto Malygos' soul cores. Malygos hoped that these ice dragon spirits could interfere with Duque, even for a moment. He was destined to be disappointed. His subordinates from 10,000 years ago were useless. Duque raised a tiche high in front of him. The blue light that bloomed from the drumstick was a strange spell made of high-purity arcane energy. It was similar to a subspace effect. All the elements that crashed into it were repelled without exception. It was not a matter of whether the elements could cause damage, but the air around the tip of the staff did not allow any form of energy or elements other than Titan energy to exist. This was the crushing of a high-level mystery against a low-level mystery. Don't underestimate me. Malygos roared. Facing Duque, who was diving down, Malygos stretched his neck and bit at Duque with the speed of a viper's tongue. He had to admit that this move was a bit unexpected. The strongest thing about dragon liches was their magic. Their spellcasting ability was so powerful that it was easy for people to forget that they were dragons before they were liches. The sharp teeth of a dragon could tear apart 99% of the existence in this world. Even Duque, who already had a demigod body, was definitely not in that 1%. Bitten? Almost there? Just from the taste alone, Malygos knew that he was about to bite Duque. Duque was practically delivering himself to the dragon's mouth. He ran headfirst into Malygos' big mouth that was filled with the stench of decay. According to the normal procedure, Duque would be swallowed in one gulp. Even if the former Dragon King's stomach had withered and shrunk, as long as there was enough shadow energy, Malygos could still recover some of his body's functions. For example, he could quickly secrete gastric acid and melt Duque. This was Duque's real body, without a doubt. Malygos could almost imagine how delicious it would be to swallow this despicable kid who had stepped into the divine realm as a mortal and made him disgusted and angry. Perhaps his taste buds had degenerated and he could no longer taste anything. But that kind of spiritual satisfaction must be indescribable. Just as Malygos was thinking about swallowing, Duque's cold voice suddenly came from his mouth. "Stupid dragon! You're thinking too much." Accompanied by this angry curse, an incomparably bright golden light burst out from the gap between the dragon's teeth. Wah! It was a feeling of extreme heat. It was as if what he had eaten wasn't something else, but a sun. High temperature, scorching heat, and a burning pain that burned his soul. It was as if his tongue had been pulled out by a hot poker and then burned off with an ultra-high temperature welding torch. Unable to control himself, Malygos subconsciously let out the most miserable scream. This wasn't the end. Duque pulled out Song of Light and Shadow. It was definitely not as simple as cutting off Malygos's broken tongue from his smelly mouth. This was just a part of his plan. In less than 1/3 of a second, Duque, who had switched to a sword, had become one with it. He directly broke through Malygos' rotten chin muscles and pierced through. A golden light flashed and connected Malygos' chin and chest. The sharp golden sword rotated clockwise at high speed, turning into a terrifying drill. When all the strange sounds were squeezed into 1 second, it sounded like a special elongated sound. The sturdy dragon scales, dragon skin, and thick muscles that Malygos had been proud of when he was alive had weakened due to the passing of his life. These dull-toned items didn't even feel as good as a top-tier epic-ranked shield. As Malygos screamed and subconsciously retreated, Duque's divine artifact longsword finally broke through the rotten chest and pierced deeply into the soul core that was suspended in the middle of the chest, replacing the role of the heart. Divine golden light, with a small amplitude of tens of thousands of times per second, fiercely attacked this big walnut that was condensed with the powerful power of darkness. The black soul core, which had been greatly strengthened by resentment, anger, and other negative energy, kept making its final struggle. Everything was in vain. The moment the blade of the divine sword passed down from the Pantheon temple touched the core, the result was decided. No matter how much it resisted, it couldn't escape the crushing of fate. In the soul world, what Duque heard was a sound that sounded like an egg breaking. Woo-woo. In the end, Malygos let out a soul lament that wanted to cry out but couldn't. As the soul core was destroyed, it became smaller and more ethereal. Even after being cut in half, the huge dragon body quickly lost the ability to move. The former king of magic, lord of the blue dragons, and one of the 5 dragon aspects of Azeroth, Malygos, soul annihilation. It entered the chest and came out from the back. When Duque pierced through Malygos' body and stood 100 meters behind him, the huge rotten body collapsed with a bang, causing smoke and dust to fill the air. Duque didn't even look at it. As if mocking himself, he said, "Sigh. I still remember asking the guy next to me how to add talent points to a mage. What did that guy say? Add 1 point to something that will shine, then add points to charge, armor piercing, and fury. You'll be a good pharaoh." At that time, I thought it was a joke, but now I feel that what this guy said is the truth. They said that everyone was a noble pharaoh, using mystery and mysterious magic to determine the winner, and then fighting like hooligans, using melee combat to determine the winner. Just thinking about it was enough to make one drunk. Duque shook his head and spread his divine will, quietly casting his attention to the other battlefields. Chapter 1711. Tyrion was fighting rotten intestines. As the wielder of Ashbringer, Tyrion's attack power was not low. Paladins were famous for being able to fight, carry, and heal people. Apart from a slight lack of mobility and low attack power, everything else was an advantage. Now, even his attack power had increased. This Tyrion Fordring, as long as he didn't encounter an enemy with high agility and running around, anyone who saw him would have to call him Grandpa. The title of Empress Dowager was not undeserved. Originally, it should have been easy for Tyrion to deal with a mutant monster leader. However, rotten intestines, as the boss used by the Scourge to hold the fort, naturally had its own uniqueness. Since Nazul became the Lich King, the Scourge had been committed to various taboo experiments. Among them, the plague experiment was the most fruitful. The disgusting thing about rotten intestines was that it would constantly make a fuss about poisonous gas. As soon as Tyrion was thrown in front of rotten intestines, the field had already been injected with orange withering poisonous gas. Even though Tyrion immediately stirred up the holy light in his body to purify the poisonous gas as much as possible, the effect was not great. If not for Dooku's invention of the Azeroth gas mask, Tyrion might have been kneeling by now. Even with the gas mask, he still felt that he was continuously being injured by the poisonous gas. The damage was divided into 4 states: high, medium, low, and none. Tyrion noticed that rotten intestines would inhale the poisonous gas on the field every once in a while to increase its attack power. Every time it inhaled, the damage from the poisonous gas would be reduced. In contrast, after rotten intestines sucked up all the poisonous gas on the field, it would expel all the poisonous gas at once, causing huge damage to Tyrion in the form of a gas bomb. At the same time, the poisonous gas damage on the field returned to the highest. However, Tyrion could not kill it directly with Ashbringer even with all his strength. The deformed flesh that was born from countless taboo experiments contained unimaginable evil power. The high concentration of shadow energy in these flesh and bones desperately resisted the invasion of the holy light. Even with Ashbringer's full strength, it could only turn about 1/10 of its flesh into ashes. Oh, a monster specially prepared to restrain Ashbringer? Tyrion was not young anymore. He had long passed the age of impulse. If he had just become a paladin, he might have rushed to attack recklessly. But after 25 years of fighting, he had already changed from a young boy to a mature and steady holy knight uncle. After carefully evaluating the combat power and characteristics of both sides, Theon did not rush the fight. He had a plan and rhythmically whittled down rotten intestines' life force. The Empress Dowager was still able to hold her ground against rotten intestines, but not everyone had a suitable opponent. For example, Gavin Rad was having a hard time. His opponent, Rotten Face, was a typical monster that countered him. Although Rotten Noodles had the same appearance as rotten intestines, their attack mechanism was completely different. It would cast Aberration Infection on Gavin Rad. At first, after Gavin Rad dispelled this strange disease, he did not notice it. He immediately discovered that the virus spores that had been expelled from his body had actually absorbed the foreign objects in the air and on the ground, and soon turned into a small sludge monster. At first, Gavin Rad did not pay attention to the green poop. In the end, after going back and forth a few times, there were too many small sludge monsters. When it came to large sludge monsters, Gavin Rad had a hard time. This big guy's attack was very high, and it just so happened that it was the type that countered him. Holy light and physical attacks were ineffective against the ooze monsters. However, he did not have many elemental attacks. It was true that the wind sword in his hand had natural elemental attacks, but the problem was that it was very difficult for physical attacks like the wind blade to deal heavy damage to the ooze monsters. Left with no choice, Gavin Rad could only run while being chased by the ooze monsters, constantly looking for opportunities to attack Rotten Face. His holy light could drive his body to heal, but he could not replenish the blood and energy he had lost. This battle was not only a test of willpower, but also a judgment of the battle situation and an inference of the enemy's characteristics. Because of Anastrian's betrayal, and because the Alliance had cooperated with the Horde during the fight against the Burning Legion and the expedition against Illidan in the Outland, the leaders of the Calamity Army were all very focused. Apart from a few places such as Varian's, where Brawl was heavily injured in exchange for a quick victory, the rest of the battles were rather difficult. The most dangerous one was naturally the battle under the Ice Monarch. Vashch's 6 weapons slashed at Arthas almost at the same time. In terms of speed, the Naga Queen was definitely above the Lich King. This was her greatest characteristic, and Vashch was also prepared to make full use of this advantage. Unfortunately, the 3 women present were too unfamiliar with the skills of the Death Knights. Before entering the Ice Crown Fortress, it was true that every leader had been asked to discuss the skills of the Death Knights with Darian Mograine. However, most of the skills that the Lich King passed down to the Death Knights were weakened versions. Moreover, the effects of the skills used by the powerhouses of different levels were also very different. Blowing the opponent with cold wind and infecting the enemy with frost plague, this kind of cold touch, which reduces the opponent's attack speed, was used by Darian. For genuine demigods like Vashch, it was only an itch. As the Lich King rushed out, Vashch only felt extremely cold air coming from the sky and the earth, attacking from all directions. It directly forced its way through the gaps of her scales and through the pores that were supposed to be closed. It was a terrifying chill that could freeze one's bloodline and even numb one's soul. Even Queen Shi and Xianxia, who were watching from afar, could clearly see Vashch's movements slowing down. The originally swift and fierce slashes suddenly became slow. Every joint in the Naga Queen's body seemed to have rusted. Not only were her movements slow, but they even made terrifying creaking sounds. Xianxia had no choice but to give Vashch a fireball. Under normal circumstances, this was a classic case of murdering a teammate. But in the case of Arthas's invincible cold air, it was a life-saving move. When the Frostmourne slashed at her, Vashch barely regained her normal speed. At this time, Arthas made 3 consecutive swords the rune greatsword that emitted dark and evil waves turned into a cyan shadow in his hand. 1 slash, 1 press and 1 press. Because the speed was too fast, even Sylvanas, who had amazing eyesight, still felt as if Frostmourne had split into 3 in an instant and turned into a double-headed greatsword at the same time, clashing with Vashch's 6 melee weapons. Clang dash, a total of 6 sounds of blades clashing actually turned into the same metallic sound. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.